welcome back to our podcast. Everyone, we're so to be here with you today. And we're not just here for the coffee. Although, let's be honest, we love our coffee.
Don't even get us started. We're here to dive into a fascinating comparison of two incredible countries.
That's right. And to get us started, I want to share a funny story from our previous podcast.
Oh boy, what happened?
Well, Leo here decided to try a new coffee shop. And let's just say it was an interesting experience.
Oh, come on. Mira, it was just a little coffee spill.
A little coffee spill? You looked like a walking coffee cup.
Well, at least I'm consistent, right?
Consistent. You're consistent in making a mess.
Hey, that's not fair. I'm a coffee connoisseur. Remember?
Oh, I remember. That's why we have a whole coffee-stained couch in our studio now.
Well, it's a small price to pay for great coffee, right?
I suppose so. Anyway, enough about our coffee adventures. Today, we're to bring you a comprehensive guide to amazing countries Equatorial Guinea and Grenada.
That's right. And with today's podcast, we'll be answering all the questions in your mind about these two incredible nations.
Whether you're considering living, moving, or even marrying someone from one of these countries, we've got you covered.
We'll be sharing our insights, experiences, and expertise to help you make informed decisions about these two fascinating countries.
So, sit back, relax, and let us guide you through the wonders of Equatorial Guinea and Grenada.
And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel, powered by the amazing folks at Jet Off AI, who make all this possible.
Thanks, Leo. And to our listeners, we're grateful for your support.
Now, let's get started on this adventure and explore the differences between Equatorial Guinea and Grenada.
That's right. And trust us, you won't want to miss this.
So, without further ado, let's dive into the first topic, economy.
The economy, where the rubber meets the road, so to speak.
Nice one. Mira.
Let's dive into Equatorial Guinea and Grenada. Two countries with unique approaches to general safety and crime rates. I'm curious, Leo, how do you think Equatorial Guinea's oil-rich environment affects its crime landscape?
Well, Mira, Equatorial Guinea's economy is heavily reliant on oil exports, which has created a power imbalance and corruption. This can lead to higher crime rates, especially in the capital city, Malabo. I've heard stories of bribery and extortion, which can be a challenge for tourists and locals alike.
That's an excellent point. And speaking of tourists, I'm sure our listeners would agree that safety is a top priority when traveling abroad. In Equatorial Guinea, the government has implemented measures to increase security, such as deploying military personnel in tourist areas. But what about Grenada? Leo? How does its smaller population and economy affect its crime rates?
Grenada is a great example of a country that's invested in community-based policing. The island's smaller size and tight-knit community make it easier for authorities to respond to crime quickly and effectively. Plus, Grenada's tourism industry is more focused on ecotourism and sustainable development, which can help reduce crime related to human trafficking and exploitation.
That's fascinating. Leo, I've heard that Grenada's government has also implemented programs to address domestic violence and support victims. Can you tell me more about that?
Yes, Mira. Grenada has made significant strides in addressing domestic violence and promoting gender equality. The government has established a domestic violence unit within the police force, and there are also programs in place to support victims and provide counseling services.
Wow, that's impressive. And I'm sure our listeners would appreciate knowing more about the cultural factors that contribute to crime in these countries. In Equatorial Guinea, for example, there's a strong emphasis on family and community ties, which can sometimes lead to honor-related crimes.
Exactly. Mira. And in Grenada, the cultural context is also important. The island has a strong history of colonialism, which has shaped its social and economic structures. However, Grenada has also made significant progress in promoting national identity and community cohesion.
I'm curious. Leo, how do you think the international community can support countries like Equatorial Guinea and Grenada in addressing crime and promoting safety?
Well, Mira, I think it's essential to provide technical assistance and training to help build capacity within law enforcement agencies. Additionally, supporting community-based initiatives and promoting economic development can also help reduce crime and improve safety.
That's a great point. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners would agree that it's essential to approach these issues with a nuanced and culturally sensitive perspective. In Equatorial Guinea, for example, the government has implemented programs to address corruption and improve transparency. But more needs to be done to address the root causes of crime.
Absolutely, Mira. And in Grenada, the government has also made efforts to address corruption and improve transparency. But there's still more work to be done. However, the island's strong community spirit and commitment to sustainable development are definite strengths in the fight against crime.
Well, Leo, it's clear that both Equatorial Guinea and Grenada have unique challenges and opportunities when it comes to general safety and crime rates. But what about our listeners? Leo, what do you think is the most pressing issue when it comes to crime and safety in these countries?
Mira, I think our listeners would agree that addressing the root causes of crime is essential. Whether it's poverty, lack of education, or corruption. These issues need to be addressed in order to create a safer and more secure environment for everyone.
Absolutely, Leo. And I'm sure our listeners would appreciate knowing more about the role of community engagement and participation in addressing crime. In Equatorial Guinea, for example, community-based initiatives are crucial in addressing issues like domestic violence and human trafficking.
That's right, Mira. And in Grenada, community engagement is also essential in promoting safety and reducing crime. The island's strong community spirit and commitment to sustainable development have made it an example for other countries to follow.
Well, Leo, it's clear that both Equatorial Guinea and Grenada have made significant progress in addressing crime and promoting safety. But there's still more work to be done. What do you think is the most important lesson that can be learned from these countries' experiences?
Mira, I think the most important lesson is that addressing crime and promoting safety requires a multifaceted approach that involves government, community, and international cooperation. It's not just about throwing more resources at the problem, but about creating a comprehensive strategy that addresses the root causes of crime.
Well said, Leo. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that crime and promoting safety is a complex issue that requires a nuanced and culturally sensitive approach. In Equatorial Guinea and Grenada, we've seen that community-based initiatives and economic development can play a crucial role in reducing crime and improving safety.
Absolutely, Mira. And I'm sure our listeners would appreciate knowing more about the role of technology in addressing crime and promoting safety. In Equatorial Guinea, for example, the government has implemented programs to improve surveillance and monitoring. But more needs to be done to address the root causes of crime.
That's a great point. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that technology can be a valuable tool in addressing crime. But it's not a substitute for community-based initiatives and economic development.
Exactly, Mira. And in Grenada, the government has also made efforts to improve surveillance and monitoring. But the island's strong community spirit and commitment to sustainable development are still the most effective ways to address crime and promote safety.
Well, it's clear that both Equatorial Guinea and Grenada have unique challenges and opportunities when it comes to general safety and crime rates. But what about our listeners? Leo, what do you think is the most important takeaway from this conversation?
Mira, I think the most important takeaway is that addressing crime and promoting safety requires a comprehensive approach that involves government, community, and international cooperation. It's not just about throwing more resources at the problem, but about creating a long-term strategy that addresses the root causes of crime.
Absolutely, Leo. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that addressing crime and promoting safety is a complex issue that requires a nuanced and culturally sensitive approach. In Equatorial Guinea and Grenada, We've seen that community-based initiatives and economic development can play a crucial role in reducing crime and improving safety.
Well, Mira, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this conversation. But what about our listeners? Mira, what do you think is the most pressing issue when it comes to crime and safety in these countries?
Leo, I think our listeners would agree that addressing the root causes of crime is essential. Whether it's poverty, lack of education, or corruption, these issues need to be addressed in order to create a safer. I'm sure many of our listeners are interested in understanding how governance affects their lives abroad. Let's dive into Equatorial Guinea's unique blend of authoritarianism and traditional power structures. From what I've gathered, the country's president has held power since 1979, and his son has taken a more prominent role in recent years.
Yes, the father-son duo. It's like a real-life Game of Thrones. But seriously, Mira, their rule has led to a lack of transparency and accountability, which can make life as an expat quite challenging. I mean, who wants to deal with corrupt officials and bureaucratic red tape?
That's a great point, Leo. And it's not just the government's actions that can be frustrating. It's also the cultural norms that can be difficult to navigate. For example, in Equatorial Guinea, there's a strong emphasis on respect for authority, which can sometimes manifest as fear or even intimidation.
I see what you mean. It's like a delicate balance between respecting tradition and pushing for change. But, Mira, I have to ask, have you ever tried to navigate a bureaucratic process in Equatorial Guinea? I've heard it's like trying to solve a puzzle blindfolded.
Well, I've had my fair share of struggles, but I'm sure it's not as bad as you make it sound. Leo, I do think it's essential to acknowledge the complexities of the country's system. And, as expats, we need to be aware of our own biases and assumptions when interacting with the local culture.
Absolutely. Mira, and I think that's where Jet off. I comes in providing us with valuable insights and information to help us better understand the countries we're living in. But, back to Equatorial Guinea. Have you heard about the country's unique approach to social harmony? Apparently, they have a strong tradition of community-based conflict resolution.
Yes, I've read about that. It's fascinating to see how they use traditional methods to resolve disputes. But, I'm curious, Leo, how do you think this approach could be applied to other countries, like Grenada, which we'll be discussing later?
Well, Mira, I think it's all about finding that balance between tradition and modernity. Grenada, for example, has a strong emphasis on community and social cohesion, which is reflected in their vibrant carnival celebrations. And, if I'm not mistaken, they also have a unique system of conflict resolution, which involves a mix of traditional and modern approaches.
That's a great point, Leo. And I think it's essential to acknowledge the importance of community and social cohesion in both countries. But I'm also curious about the role of technology in shaping social harmony. For example, how do social media platforms like Facebook and WhatsApp impact community relationships in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think social media can be both a blessing and a curse. On the one hand, it can connect people and foster a sense of community. But, on the other hand, it can also create divisions and exacerbate existing conflicts.
I see what you mean, Leo. And I think it's essential to consider the potential consequences of social media on community relationships. But I'm also curious about the role of education in shaping social harmony. For example, how do schools in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada promote social cohesion and conflict resolution?
Well, Mira, it's kind of like a thing. I've heard that schools in both countries place a strong emphasis on values like respect, empathy, and tolerance. And in Equatorial Guinea, they also have a unique program that teaches students about conflict resolution and mediation.
That's fascinating, Leo. And I think it's essential to acknowledge the importance of education in shaping social harmony. But I'm also curious about the role of expats in promoting social harmony. For example, how can we, as expats, contribute to the social cohesion of our host communities?
Ah, that's a great question. Mira, I think expats can play a significant role in promoting social harmony by being respectful of local customs and traditions. And by engaging with the local community and building relationships, we can help foster a sense of trust and understanding.
I see what you mean, Leo. And I think it's essential to acknowledge the importance of expats in promoting social harmony. But I'm also curious about the potential challenges that expats may face in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada. For example, how can we navigate cultural differences and avoid unintentionally offending locals?
Well, Mira, I think it's all about being aware of our own biases and assumptions. And by being open-minded and respectful, we can build strong relationships with the local community. And, if I'm not mistaken, there's a great resource on GDPs. AI that provides tips and advice for expats on navigating cultural differences.
Yes, I've seen that. It's a valuable resource for expats, and I'm sure our listeners will find it helpful. But I'm also curious about the potential benefits of living in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada. For example, how can these countries offer a unique experience for expats?
Well, Mira, I think both countries offer a unique blend of traditional and modern culture. And in Equatorial Guinea, you can experience the vibrant city life of Malabo, while in Grenada, you can enjoy the beautiful beaches and lush rainforests.
That's a great point, Leo. And I think it's essential to acknowledge the importance of cultural diversity in shaping our experiences as expats. But I'm also curious about the potential challenges that expats may face in these countries. For example, how can we deal with the complexities of the local healthcare system?
That's a great question. Mira, I think it's essential to be aware of the local healthcare system and to take steps to prepare ourselves for any potential challenges. And, if I'm not mistaken, there's a great resource on GDPs. That provides information on healthcare systems in different countries.
Yes, I've seen that. It's a valuable resource for expats, and I'm sure our listeners will find it helpful. But I'm also curious about the potential benefits of living in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada. For example, how can these countries offer a unique experience for expats?
Well, Mira, I think both countries offer a unique blend of traditional and modern culture. And in Equatorial Guinea, you can experience the vibrant city life of Malabo, while in Grenada, you can enjoy the beautiful beaches and lush rainforests.
That's a great point. And I think it's essential to acknowledge the importance of cultural diversity in shaping our experiences as expats. So, let's dive into the economic conditions and costs of living in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada. I'm curious, Leo, what's the general vibe when it comes to job opportunities in Equatorial Guinea?
That's a great question. Mira, from what I've gathered, the oil and gas industry drives the economy in Equatorial Guinea, which creates a decent number of job opportunities, especially in the energy sector.
That's interesting. I've heard that the cost of living in Malabo, the capital city, can be quite high due to the limited supply of goods and services. Have you come across any statistics on that?
Actually, yes. According to some reports, the cost of living in Malabo is one of the highest in Africa. The prices for basic necessities like food, housing, and transportation are quite steep.
Well, that's surprising. I'm sure our listeners living in Equatorial Guinea would agree with me that it's essential to have a stable income to maintain a decent standard of living.
Absolutely. And it's not just the cost of living that's a concern. The income inequality in Equatorial Guinea is also quite pronounced. The wealth generated by the oil and gas industry is largely concentrated among the elite, leaving many ordinary citizens behind.
That's a shame. I'm curious. Leo, how does Grenada compare in terms of economic conditions and cost of living?
Well, Grenada has a more diversified economy, with a focus on agriculture, tourism, and manufacturing. The cost of living is generally lower compared to Equatorial Guinea, and the island has a more equitable income distribution.
That sounds promising. I've heard that Grenada has a growing expat community, particularly in the tourism and healthcare sectors. Have you come across any statistics on the cost of living for expats in Grenada?
Yes, according to some reports, the cost of living in Grenada is relatively affordable for expats, especially compared to other Caribbean islands. The island has a well-developed infrastructure, and the cost of housing, food, and transportation is generally lower.
That's great to hear. I'm sure our listeners would be interested in knowing more about the job market in Grenada. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure, the job market in Grenada is relatively small, but it's growing, especially in the tourism and hospitality sectors. The island has a strong focus on sustainable development, which creates opportunities for ecotourism and environmentally friendly businesses.
I'm curious. Leo, how do you think our listeners can make the most of the economic conditions and cost of living in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada?
Well, it really depends on their individual circumstances and goals. For those looking for job opportunities, Equatorial Guinea might be a good option, especially in the energy sector. However, for those who value a more stable and equitable economy, Grenada might be a better fit.
That's a great point. Leo, I think it's essential for our listeners to research and understand the economic conditions and cost of living in both countries before making a decision.
Absolutely. And don't forget to factor in the cost of living in other Caribbean islands and African countries. It's always a good idea to have a backup plan and be prepared for any unexpected expenses.
Good advice. I'm sure our listeners will appreciate your insights on this topic. And don't forget to share your thoughts and experiences in the comments section below.
Will do. Mira, thanks for the opportunity to share my thoughts on this topic.
So let's dive into the world of accommodation options and quality in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada. I'm curious. Leo, have you ever stayed in a guest house that was more like a home away from home?
Well, Mira, I've had my fair share of questionable accommodations. But I think the most memorable one was in Equatorial Guinea. I stayed in a small village, and the guest house was literally a family's home that they had converted into a lodging.
That sounds like an adventure. I can imagine it was quite an experience. Did you have to get used to some interesting customs?
Oh, you have no idea. The family was incredibly welcoming, but they had some, let's say, unique traditions. Like, they would often invite me to join in on their meals. And I'd be sitting there with my hands together, trying to figure out how to eat with my hands without offending anyone.
I can just imagine. And I'm sure our listeners who have lived in Equatorial Guinea would agree that it's not always easy to navigate the cultural differences.
Exactly. But it's all part of the experience, right? And it's not all bad news. Mira, I've heard that Grenada has some amazing villas and apartments that are perfect for expats.
That's true. Grenada is known for its beautiful beaches and lush vegetation. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the rental market there.
Ah, yes. So, in Grenada, you can find everything from cozy beachside bungalows to luxurious villas with private pools. And the best part is that many of these rentals are fully furnished and equipped with modern appliances.
Wow, that sounds amazing. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the rental process in Grenada. Do you think it's easier to find a place to rent in Grenada compared to Equatorial Guinea?
That's a good question. Mira, I think it's easier to find a place to rent in Grenada, mainly because it's a more tourist-friendly country. But, of course, that also means that prices can be a bit higher.
Ah, I see what you mean. Well, it's all about finding the right balance between affordability and amenities, right? And I'm sure our listeners would agree that it's worth it to have a comfortable and convenient place to stay.
Absolutely. And speaking of amenities, have you heard about the new eco-resorts that are popping up in Equatorial Guinea?
Oh, yes. I've heard that they're becoming quite popular among eco-tourists. But, Leo, I'm curious. What do you think about the housing standards in Equatorial Guinea compared to Grenada?
That's a tough one. Mira, I think both countries have their own unique challenges when it comes to housing. In Equatorial Guinea, it's often a matter of finding a place that's safe and secure. While in Grenada, it's more about finding a place that's affordable and convenient.
I see what you mean. And I think it's great that our listeners are getting a sense of the different challenges that expats face in each country.
Exactly. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have made significant strides in improving their housing infrastructure in recent years.
Ah, that's great to hear. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the current state of the housing market in each country.
Yes. Well, I think it's safe to say that both countries have their own unique charm when it comes to accommodation options and quality.
And I think it's all about finding the right fit for your lifestyle and budget, right? Whether you are looking for a luxurious villa or a cozy beachside bungalow. There's something for everyone in both Equatorial Guinea and Grenada.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes traveling and living in these countries so exciting. The possibilities are endless.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today, Leo, and I'm sure our listeners will appreciate the insights into the accommodation options and quality in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada.
Agreed. Mira. And I'm sure our listeners will be itching to plan their next adventure to one of these amazing countries.
Well, there you have it. Folks, if you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to let us know in the comments section below.
And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more exciting content about traveling and living abroad.
And if you have any recommendations for future topics or countries to explore, please let us know in the comments as well.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Hey, have you guys ever tried to navigate the visa process in Equatorial Guinea? It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack. Or in this case, a visa in a bureaucratic jungle.
Well, I think it's safe to say that Equatorial Guinea has one of the most complex visa processes in the world. I mean, who needs a PhD in bureaucracy to get a visa, right?
Exactly. And it's not just the process that's complicated, but also the requirements. You need to have a sponsor, a guarantor, and a letter of introduction, all of which can be a challenge to obtain.
That's right. And if you're a foreigner, you'll need to apply for a residence visa, which can take several months to process. But, as Mira said, the requirements are quite stringent. So it's not just a matter of filling out a form and waiting.
Yeah. And the good news is that the government of Equatorial Guinea is trying to simplify the process. But it's a work in progress. In the meantime, expats and travelers can get frustrated with the red tape.
Well, at least the scenery is beautiful in Equatorial Guinea. You've got the beaches, the mountains, and the wildlife. But I'm not sure if the visa process would be worth it for some people.
Absolutely. And speaking of beautiful scenery, let's move on to Grenada, which has a much more streamlined visa process. I'm sure our listeners living in Grenada would agree with me that it's a breeze to get a visa there.
Well, I think it's safe to say that Grenada is one of the easiest countries to get a visa for. I mean, you can even get an e-visa online, which is convenient for travelers.
That's right. And the requirements are much more relaxed than in Equatorial Guinea. You just need to have a valid passport, proof of onward travel, and sufficient funds. Easy peasy. Lemon squeezy.
Yeah. And the best part is that Grenada has a very welcoming attitude towards tourists and expats. They're very friendly and helpful, which makes the process even easier.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about the visa process in Equatorial Guinea. Have any of you guys had any experiences with getting a visa there? Share your stories in the comments below.
Yeah. And I'm sure our listeners in Grenada would agree that it's a much better experience getting a visa there. But in all seriousness, both countries have their own unique challenges and requirements.
That's right. And it's always good to be prepared and do your research before applying for a visa. But in the meantime, I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about the visa process in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada.
Yeah. And we'll do our best to provide you with more information and tips on navigating the visa process in both countries.
Well, let's move on to the next topic. But before we do, I just want to say that if you're planning to travel or move to either of these countries, make sure to check the visa requirements and regulations carefully.
Absolutely. And don't forget to check the official government websites and consult with the relevant authorities to get the most up-to-date information.
And finally, if you have any questions or comments about the visa process in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada, please let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you and help you navigate the process.
Yeah. And we'll do our best to provide you with more information and tips on navigating the visa process in both countries.
So, let's talk about access to and quality of health services in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada. I'm curious. Leo, what do you think is the biggest difference between the two countries when it comes to healthcare?
Well, Mira, I think it's safe to say that Grenada has a much more developed healthcare system than Equatorial Guinea. In fact, Grenada has a well-established public healthcare system that provides free or low-cost healthcare to its citizens.
That's fascinating. And I'm sure our listeners who have lived in Grenada would agree with you. But what about Equatorial Guinea? What's the situation like there?
Equatorial Guinea is a bit of a mixed bag. On the one hand, they have a few well-equipped hospitals in the capital city of Malabo. But on the other hand, the healthcare system is generally underfunded and understaffed.
I see. And what about cultural nuances? How do the two countries approach healthcare differently?
Well, in Grenada, for example, there's a strong emphasis on community-based healthcare. The government has implemented programs to improve health education and awareness, particularly in rural areas.
That's great to hear. And what about Equatorial Guinea? Do they have similar programs in place?
Not to the same extent, unfortunately. However, the government has made efforts to improve healthcare infrastructure, such as building new hospitals and clinics.
I'm curious. Leo, have you heard any stories from expats or locals about their experiences with healthcare in Equatorial Guinea?
Actually, I have. Some people have reported difficulties in getting medical attention, particularly outside of the capital city. But, this is not always the case.
I see. And what about Grenada? What do our listeners who have lived there have to say about the healthcare system?
Well, from what I've gathered, the healthcare system in Grenada is generally well regarded. Many expats and locals praise the quality of care and the friendliness of the healthcare staff.
That's great to hear. I'm sure our listeners will appreciate that information. And, Leo, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing the healthcare system in Equatorial Guinea?
That's a tough one. I think it's the lack of resources and funding, combined with a shortage of skilled healthcare professionals.
I agree. And what about Grenada? What are some of the challenges facing their healthcare system?
Well, Grenada faces its own set of challenges, such as limited resources and the shortage of specialists in certain areas.
I see. And what about patient experiences in Equatorial Guinea versus Grenada? Are there any notable differences?
Oh, yes. From what I've heard, patients in Grenada tend to have a more positive experience, with friendly, inefficient healthcare staff.
That's great to hear. And what about Equatorial Guinea? What can our listeners expect when seeking medical attention there?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the healthcare system in Equatorial Guinea is generally underfunded and understaffed. Patients may face longer wait times and less access to specialized care.
I see. And what about the role of private healthcare in both countries? How does it fit into the overall healthcare system?
Private healthcare plays a significant role in both countries, particularly in Equatorial Guinea. However, it's not always accessible or affordable for everyone.
I understand. And what about the impact of culture on healthcare in these countries? Are there any unique cultural nuances that our listeners should be aware of?
Well, in Grenada, for example, there's a strong emphasis on community-based healthcare, which is influenced by the country's cultural heritage.
That's fascinating. And what about Equatorial Guinea? Are there any cultural nuances that our listeners should be aware of when seeking medical attention there?
Yes. In Equatorial Guinea, For example, there's a strong emphasis on traditional healing practices, which may not always be aligned with Western medical practices.
I see. And what about the future of healthcare in both countries? Are there any developments or initiatives that our listeners should be aware of?
Well, in Grenada, for example, the government is investing in modernizing the healthcare system and improving access to specialized care.
That's great to hear. And what about Equatorial Guinea? Are there any initiatives in place to improve the healthcare system there?
Yes. The government is working to improve healthcare infrastructure and increase access to medical care, particularly in rural areas.
I'm curious. Leo, what do you think is the biggest takeaway from our discussion about healthcare in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada?
I think it's the importance of considering cultural nuances in the role of community-based healthcare in these countries.
I agree. And what are those who are planning to move to one of these countries? What advice would you give them about accessing healthcare?
Well, I would advise them to research the local healthcare system and plan accordingly, considering factors such as access to specialized care and cultural nuances.
That's great advice. Leo. And finally, I'm curious. Have we covered everything we wanted to discuss about healthcare in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada?
I think we've covered the main points, but I'm sure there's more to explore. Perhaps we can discuss it further in a future episode.
Sounds good. Leo, thanks for sharing your insights with our listeners today. Hey everyone. Let's dive into transportation infrastructure and convenience in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada. We're exploring public transit stats, road quality, and traveler experiences to uncover each country's unique transport challenges and how they enable seamless movement.
That's right. Mira, both countries have their own set of transportation hurdles. For example, in Equatorial Guinea, the public transportation system is relatively underdeveloped, making it difficult for locals and tourists alike to get around. I bet our listeners in Equatorial Guinea relate to this traffic chaos.
Indeed, they do. In fact, a study showed that only about 10% of the population has access to reliable public transportation. That's quite a challenge. On the other hand, Grenada has a more developed public transportation system, with a higher percentage of the population having access to buses and other forms of public transit.
Yes. Grenada's got it down when it comes to public transportation. But, Mira, what about the condition of the roads? I've heard that the roads in Equatorial Guinea can be quite rough, making it difficult for travelers to get around.
Well, Leo, you're right. The roads in Equatorial Guinea can be quite rough, especially in rural areas. However, Grenada's roads are generally well maintained, making it easier for tourists to get around the island.
I guess that's what I get for assuming that all African countries have rough roads. But seriously, Mira, how do you think the transportation infrastructure in these two countries affects the local economy?
Great question. Leo, in Equatorial Guinea, the lack of transportation infrastructure can actually hinder economic growth. For example, it can be difficult for businesses to transport goods and services, which can lead to higher costs and reduced economic competitiveness.
That makes sense. And in Grenada, the well-developed transportation infrastructure can actually boost economic growth. For instance, it can make it easier for tourists to visit and explore the island, which can lead to increased revenue for local businesses.
Exactly. Leo! And speaking of tourists, what about the experience of traveling in these two countries? How do you think tourists would fare when trying to get around Equatorial Guinea versus Grenada?
Well, Mira, I think tourists would definitely face some challenges when trying to get around Equatorial Guinea. But, on the other hand, Grenada's transportation infrastructure makes it relatively easy for tourists to get around the island.
I think you're right, Leo. And, hey, if you've got a better transit hack for navigating these countries, drop a comment below. Our listeners would love to hear about it.
Yeah. And if you're planning a trip to either country, don't forget to check out the local transportation options. You can find some great tips and advice from our listeners in the comments section.
Absolutely. Leah, and hey, if you've got any questions about transportation in Equatorial Guinea or Grenada, feel free to ask in the comments section. We'd be happy to help.
That's right. Mira. And, hey, before we go, let's take a quick look at some of the transportation statistics for these two countries. For example, in Equatorial Guinea, the average commute time is around 2 hours and 30 minutes, while in Grenada, it's around 30 minutes.
Well, that's a big difference. And, hey, if you're planning a trip to either country, keep in mind that the transportation options can vary greatly depending on the time of day and the location.
That's right, Mira. And, hey, if you're interested in learning more about transportation in these two countries, be sure to check out some of the resources we've linked to in the show notes.
Yeah, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more content like this. We've got a lot of great topics lined up, and we'd love to have you join us.
That's right, Mira. And, hey, before we go, let's take a quick look at some of the transportation infrastructure projects that are currently underway in these two countries. For example, in Equatorial Guinea, there are plans to build a new international airport, while in Grenada, there are plans to upgrade the public transportation system.
Oh, that's great news. And, hey, if you've got any thoughts on these projects, feel free to share them in the comments section. We'd love to hear your opinions.
That's right, Mira. And, hey, before we go, let's take a quick look at some of the transportation-related statistics for these two countries. For example, in Equatorial Guinea, the average fuel price is around $6 per gallon, while in Grenada, it's around $3 per gallon.
Well, that's a big difference. And, hey, if you're planning a trip to either country, keep in mind that fuel prices can vary greatly depending on the location and the time of year.
That's right, Mira. And, hey, if you're interested in learning more about transportation in these two countries, be sure to check out some of the resources we've linked to in the show notes.
Yeah, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more content like this. We've got a lot of great topics lined up, and we'd love to have you join us.
That's right, Mira. And, hey, before we go, let's take a quick look at some of the transportation infrastructure projects that are currently underway in these two countries. For example, in Equatorial Guinea, there are plans to build a new international airport, while in Grenada, there are plans to upgrade the public transportation system.
Oh, that's great news. And, hey, if you've got any thoughts on these projects, feel free to share them in the comments section. We'd love to hear your opinions.
That's right, Mira. And, hey, before we go, let's take a quick look at some of the transportation-related statistics for these two countries. For example, in Equatorial Guinea, the average commute time is around 2 hours and 30 minutes, while in Grenada, it's around 30 minutes.
Wow, that's a big difference. And, hey, if you're planning a trip to either country, keep in mind that the transportation options can vary greatly depending on the time of day and the location.
That's right, Mira. And,
Tied into language barriers and ease of communication in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada, I'm to share some interesting insights with you all. As we all know, language plays a crucial role in communication, and it can be a significant challenge for expats and travelers alike. In Equatorial Guinea, the official language is Spanish, but many people also speak Fang, Bub, and other local languages. Now, if you're planning to move to Equatorial Guinea, it's essential to learn some basic Spanish and local languages to communicate effectively. But, have you guys ever tried to order food in a foreign language? I once tried to order a simple coffee in a cafe in Equatorial Guinea, and let's just say it was an adventure. Leo, what about you? Have you ever encountered any language barriers while traveling?
Yes. I once tried to order a simple kebab in Turkey, and the vendor looked at me like I was speaking a different language.
I can imagine. But, seriously, Language barriers can be a significant challenge, especially when traveling or living in a foreign country. In Grenada, the official language is English, but many people also speak Grenadian Creole, which is a unique blend of English, Afrikaans, and French influences. What I find fascinating about Grenada is the way people communicate in a mix of languages. For example, in a market, you might hear a vendor speaking English to a customer, but then suddenly switch to Grenadian Creole to chat with a friend. It's amazing how languages can blend together in such a beautiful way.
That's true. In Equatorial Guinea, I've noticed that many people are multilingual, speaking multiple languages fluently.
Exactly. And it's not just about speaking multiple languages. It's also about understanding the cultural nuances of each language. In Equatorial Guinea, for example, the use of formal and informal language can be quite complex. If you're not familiar with the local customs, you might unintentionally offend someone with your language choice. But, on the other hand, if you take the time to learn the local languages and customs, you'll be rewarded with a deeper understanding and connection with the people.
That's so true. And it's not just about language. It's also about body language and nonverbal communication.
Absolutely. In Grenada, for example, people often use gestures and facial expressions to communicate, especially when speaking in Grenadian Creole. It's fascinating to observe how people use nonverbal cues to convey meaning and express themselves. And, as an expat traveler, it's essential to be aware of these cultural differences to avoid misunderstandings.
I can imagine. I once tried to give a high five to a local in Equatorial Guinea, and he looked at me like I was crazy.
Ah, yes. Cultural differences can be hilarious, but also important to understand. In Grenada, for example, people often use humor to diffuse tense situations, and it's amazing to see how they can turn a serious conversation into a joke. As an expert or traveler, it's essential to be open-minded and adapt to the local customs and language.
That's so true. And it's not just about adapting to the local culture. It's also about being respectful and sensitive to the language and customs of others.
Exactly. And, as we always say, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. But, in reality, it's not that simple. And we need to be aware of the complexities of language and culture. I'm curious, have any of you guys ever experienced a situation where you had to navigate a language barrier or cultural difference? I'm curious. Leo, how would you describe cultural diversity in Equatorial Guinea? With its mix of Bantu, Dubai, Fang, and other ethnic groups. It's a melting pot of cultures.
Well, Mira, Equatorial Guinea is indeed a unique blend of cultures. But I'd say it's more of a cultural mosaic, with each group having its own distinct identity. And let's not forget the influence of Spanish and Portuguese colonialism, which has left its mark on the country's language, architecture, and cuisine.
That's fascinating. I've heard that Equatorial Guinea has a strong tradition of tolerance, with different ethnic groups coexisting peacefully. But what about the role of government in promoting social harmony?
Oh, that's a great question. Mira, the government has implemented various initiatives to promote cultural diversity and tolerance, such as the National Institute for Social Promotion, which aims to promote social cohesion and community development. But, as with any country, there are still challenges to overcome, particularly in rural areas where traditional practices and customs can be more resistant to change.
I'm sure our listeners living in Equatorial Guinea would agree that cultural diversity is a strength of the country. But what about the impact of globalization on cultural identity? How has globalization affected the traditional way of life in Equatorial Guinea?
Well, Mira, globalization has undoubtedly brought about changes to the traditional way of life in Equatorial Guinea. With the increasing presence of foreign businesses and tourists, there's been a growing interest in Western culture, which has led to a loss of traditional practices and customs. But, on the other hand, globalization has also brought about new opportunities for cultural exchange and understanding.
That's a great point. Leo, now let's move on to Grenada, which is known for its vibrant culture and strong sense of community. What do you think is the key to Grenada's cultural diversity and tolerance?
Grenada is indeed a wonderful example of a country that values cultural diversity and tolerance. I think the key to Grenada's cultural harmony is its strong sense of history and identity. The country has a rich history of African, European, and indigenous influences, which has created a unique cultural blend that is both diverse and tolerant.
I'm sure listeners would agree that Grenada's cultural diversity is a major draw for tourists. But what about the challenges facing Grenada in terms of cultural preservation? How can the country balance the need to preserve traditional practices and customs with the demands of modernization?
Well, Mira, Grenada is facing the same challenges that many countries face in terms of cultural preservation. However, the government has implemented various initiatives to promote cultural heritage, such as the Grenada National Museum, which showcases the country's history and culture. Additionally, the government has also established cultural festivals and events to promote cultural exchange and understanding.
That's great to hear. Leah, now, let's talk about the role of education in promoting cultural diversity and tolerance. How can education play a role in promoting cultural understanding and acceptance?
Education is indeed a crucial factor in promoting cultural diversity and tolerance. Education can help to break down stereotypes and promote cultural understanding by teaching students about different cultures and traditions. Additionally, education can also promote cultural tolerance by encouraging students to appreciate and respect cultural differences.
I'm sure our listeners would agree that education is key to promoting cultural diversity and tolerance. But what about the impact of social media on cultural identity? How has social media affected the way people in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada perceive and express their cultural identity?
Well, Mira, social media has undoubtedly had an impact on cultural identity in both Equatorial Guinea and Grenada. With the rise of social media, people are now able to express their cultural identity in new and creative ways, such as through music, dance, and art. However, social media has also created new challenges, such as the spread of misinformation and the perpetuation of stereotypes.
That's a great point. Leah, finally, let's talk about the importance of cultural diversity and tolerance in promoting social cohesion. How can cultural diversity and tolerance contribute to a more harmonious society?
That's a great question. Mira, cultural diversity and tolerance are essential for promoting social cohesion because they allow people to come together and celebrate their differences. By embracing cultural diversity and tolerance, societies can create a more inclusive and harmonious environment where people feel valued and respected.
I'm certain that our listeners would agree that cultural diversity and tolerance are essential for promoting social cohesion. And that's all for this criterion on cultural diversity and tolerance in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada. Let's move on to our next topic.
Indeed. Mira, it's been a pleasure discussing cultural diversity and tolerance with you. And to our listeners, I'm sure you'll agree that cultural diversity and tolerance are essential for promoting social cohesion.
I'm sure many of you are curious about the educational opportunities in Equatorial Guinea. So, let's dive in. From what I've researched, Equatorial Guinea has a relatively low literacy rate, but they're making efforts to improve it.
That's a great point. Mira, I've also heard that the country has a strong focus on vocational training, which is really beneficial for those who want to develop skills in areas like agriculture, construction, and more.
Exactly. And I think it's interesting that Equatorial Guinea has a mix of public and private schools, which can provide students with different options for their education.
Absolutely. And I'm curious, Mira, have you come across any notable language schools or programs in Equatorial Guinea that cater to international students or expats?
Actually, yes. There are a few language schools in Malabo that offer Spanish and French language courses, which is great for those who want to improve their language skills.
That's fantastic. And I've heard that Grenada, our second country, has a very different educational landscape. Can you tell us a bit about the literacy rate and educational system in Grenada?
Yes. Grenada has a relatively high literacy rate, and their education system is actually quite comprehensive, with a focus on STEM subjects and vocational training.
Whoa, that's impressive. And I've also heard that Grenada has a strong tradition of language learning, with many students studying English, Spanish, and French.
Exactly. And I think it's great that Grenada has a mix of public and private schools, which can provide students with different options for their education.
Absolutely. And I'm curious. Mira, have you come across any notable language schools or programs in Grenada that cater to international students or expats?
Actually, yes. There are a few language schools in Street Georges that offer English language courses, as well as some cultural immersion programs that allow students to experience the local culture.
That sounds like a great opportunity for language learners. And I think it's interesting that both countries have a strong focus on vocational training, which can be really beneficial for students who want to develop practical skills.
Exactly. And I think it's also worth noting a rich cultural heritage, which can be really valuable for students who want to learn about the local customs and traditions.
Absolutely. And I'm curious. Mia, what do you think are the biggest challenges facing the educational systems in both the Equatorial Guinea and Grenada?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges is the lack of resources and infrastructure in some areas, particularly in Equatorial Guinea.
That's a great point. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries face challenges related to language, with many students speaking multiple languages at home, but not necessarily in school.
Exactly. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong focus on community engagement and outreach, which can be really beneficial for students who want to get involved in their local communities.
Absolutely. And I'm curious. Mira, what do you think are the biggest strengths of the educational systems in both Equatorial Guinea and Grenada?
Well, I think one of the biggest strengths is the focus on vocational training and practical skills, which can be really beneficial for students who want to develop skills in areas like agriculture, construction, and...
That's a great point. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong tradition of language learning, which can be really valuable for students who want to develop language skills.
Exactly. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a rich cultural heritage, which can be really valuable for students who want to learn about the local customs and traditions.
Absolutely. And I'm curious. Mira, what do you think our listeners can take away from this comparison of educational opportunities in language schools in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways is the importance of vocational training and practical skills in both countries, as well as the value of language learning and cultural immersion.
That's a great point. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong focus on community engagement and outreach, which can be really beneficial for students who want to get involved in their local communities.
Exactly. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a rich cultural heritage, which can be really valuable for students who want to learn about the local customs and traditions.
Absolutely. And I think our listeners would agree that both countries have a lot to offer when it comes to educational opportunities and language learning.
I'm certain that our listeners living in these countries would agree with me. And I'm curious, what do you think are some of the best ways to learn a new language and adapt to a new culture?
That's a great question. Mira, I think one of the best ways is to immerse yourself in the local culture and language, whether it's through language classes, cultural events, or simply living with a host family.
Exactly. And I think it's also worth noting that language learning apps and online resources can be really helpful for those who want to learn a new language on their own.
That's a great point. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong focus on community engagement and outreach, which can be really beneficial for students who want to get involved in their local communities.
Absolutely. And I think our listeners would agree that both countries have a lot to offer when it comes to educational opportunities and language learning.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you have any thoughts on the educational opportunities in language schools in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada?
Well, I think it's clear that both countries have their strengths and weaknesses when it comes to education.
Exactly. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a lot to offer when it comes to cultural immersion and language learning.
Absolutely. And I think our listeners would agree that both countries have a lot to offer when it comes to educational opportunities and language learning.
Well, I think that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us on this comparison of educational opportunities in language schools in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada.
I'm sure our listeners living in Equatorial Guinea would agree with me that the climate there is incredibly humid and hot, especially in the summer months. We're talking about an average temperature of 28 degrees Celsius, with some areas reaching up to 35 degrees. That's like walking into a sauna without even entering a building.
Yeah, I can imagine. I've been to some hot places before, but that's just ridiculous. And don't even get me started on the humidity. I mean, I like a good sweat session at the gym, but this is just excessive. But seriously, Mira, the climate in Equatorial Guinea does have a significant impact on the daily lives of the people living there. It's not just about the heat. It's also about the rain. I'm sure our listeners would agree that the rain in Equatorial Guinea can be quite intense.
Absolutely. The country experiences a lot of rainfall throughout the year, with some areas receiving over 4 of rain annually. That's like having a never-ending monsoon season. But, it's not all bad. The rain does bring a lot of life to the country, and it's actually a major source of revenue for the government through hydroelectric power.
Yeah, I guess that's a good thing. But, Mira, I have to ask, have you ever been to a place where the rain is so intense that it's almost like a flood? I mean, I've been in some pretty heavy downpours before, but this sounds like something else.
Actually, Leah, I have been to a place like that. It was in Equatorial Guinea, and it was during the rainy season. The rain was so heavy that it flooded the streets, and we had to take shelter in a nearby building. But, it was actually kind of exciting. I mean, who doesn't love a good adventure, right?
Yeah, I guess that's one way to look at it. But, Mira, I have to ask, how do the people living in Equatorial Guinea adapt to the climate? I mean, it's not like they can just move to a different country or something.
Well, that's a great question. Leo, the people living in Equatorial Guinea have actually developed some really creative ways to adapt to the climate. For example, they use a lot of traditional architecture that's designed to withstand the heavy rainfall and high temperatures. And they also have a lot of outdoor activities that are geared towards the climate, like swimming and playing sports in the rain.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. But, Mira, I have to ask, have you ever tried any of those outdoor activities in the rain? I mean, I've tried playing soccer in the rain before, but it's not exactly my favorite thing to do.
Actually, Leo, I have tried playing soccer in the rain before. And, it's actually kind of fun. I mean, it's not like playing soccer in perfect weather, but it's definitely a unique experience. And, it's a great way to stay cool in the heat.
Yeah, I guess that's true. But, Mira, I have to ask, what about the other country we're comparing? Grenada? How does the climate there compare to Equatorial Guinea?
Well, Leo, Grenada has a much more temperate climate than Equatorial Guinea. It's got a tropical savanna climate, with two distinct seasons, the dry season and the wet season. And, the temperatures are much more moderate there, with an average temperature of around 26 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, that sounds much more pleasant than Equatorial Guinea. But, Mira, I have to ask, what about the rainfall in Grenada? Is it as intense as in Equatorial Guinea?
Actually, the rainfall in Grenada is much more moderate than in Equatorial Guinea. It gets around 500 of rain per year, which is much less than Equatorial Guinea. But, the rain in Grenada is still important for the country's agriculture and hydroelectric power.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. But, Mira, I have to ask, how do the people living in Grenada adapt to the climate? I mean, it's not like they can just move to a different country or something.
That's a great question. Leo, the people living in Grenada have actually developed some really creative ways to adapt to the climate. For example, they use a lot of traditional architecture that's designed to withstand the heavy rainfall and high temperatures. They also have a lot of outdoor activities that are geared towards the climate, like swimming and playing sports in the rain.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. But, Mira, I have to ask, have you ever tried any of those outdoor activities in the rain? I mean, I've tried playing soccer in the rain before, but it's not exactly my favorite thing to do.
Actually, Leo, I have tried playing soccer in the rain before. And, you know, it's actually kind of fun. I mean, it's not like playing soccer in perfect weather, but it's definitely a unique experience. And, you know, it's a great way to stay cool in the heat.
Yeah, I guess that's true. But, Mira, I have to ask, what about the unique features of the climate in each country? I mean, are there any unique features that set them apart from each other?
Well, Leo, one unique feature of the climate in Equatorial Guinea is the dry season. It's a period of time when the rain is scarce, and the temperatures are much cooler. It's actually a great time to visit the country if you want to see the wildlife, because the dry season is when the animals are most active.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. But, Mira, I have to ask, what about the unique features of the climate in Grenada? I mean, is there anything that sets it apart from Equatorial Guinea?
Actually, Leo, one unique feature of the climate in Grenada is the coral reefs. They're some of the most beautiful and diverse coral reefs in the world, and they're actually a major tourist attraction for the country.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. But, Mira, I have to ask, how do the coral reefs impact the climate in Grenada? I mean, are they a major factor in the country's weather patterns?
Well, Leo, the coral reefs actually play a big role in the climate in Grenada. They help to regulate the ocean temperatures and protect the coastline from storms. And I'm so to dive into the world of food culture and nutritional alternatives in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada. Let's start with Equatorial Guinea, where the cuisine is heavily influenced by African, Spanish, and Portuguese traditions. I'm curious, Leo, have you ever tried any of the local dishes like NDJ ale or fume?
Ah, yes. I had the pleasure of trying NDJL, which is essentially a fish stew made with fermented fish and spices. It was quite an acquired taste, but I appreciated the bold flavors. I'm sure our listeners living in Equatorial Guinea would agree that the country's culinary heritage is a unique blend of cultures.
Exactly. And speaking of unique flavors, I've heard that the people of Equatorial Guinea are quite fond of their fufu dish made from boiled and pounded cassava or yams. Have you tried it, Leo?
Well, I didn't exactly try it, but I did see it being prepared at a local market. The process of pounding the cassava into a fine paste is quite fascinating, and I'm sure it's a labor of love for the cooks who make it. I'm curious, Mira, what do you think about the use of fermented foods in Equatorial Guinean cuisine?
Ah, I think it's fantastic. Fermented foods like NDJ ale and fume add a depth of flavor and nutritional value that's hard to replicate with fresh ingredients. And speaking of nutritional value, have you heard about the high levels of antioxidants found in some of the local fruits like the Udara fruit?
Yes, I've heard about the Udara fruit, but I'm not sure if I'd be brave enough to try it. However, I do think that the use of local fruits and vegetables in Equatorial Guinean cuisine is a great way to incorporate more nutrients into the diet.
Well, I think you should be brave and try it. And speaking of trying new foods, I'm curious about the Grenadian cuisine. Have you ever tried any of the local dishes like oil down or canelo?
Ah, yes. I've tried oil down, which is a hearty stew made with meat, vegetables, and dumplings. It's a staple in Grenadian cuisine, and I can see why it's delicious. And I've also tried callaloo, which is a leafy green vegetable that's often used in soups and stews.
Exactly. And speaking of soups and stews, I've heard that the people of Grenada are quite fond of their saltfish dish made with salted cod, onions, and bell peppers. Have you tried it, Leah?
Well, I didn't exactly try it, but I did have a taste of it at a local restaurant. The combination of flavors and textures was quite interesting, and I can see why it's a popular dish in Grenada.
Oh, I think it's a great example of how Grenadian cuisine combines different flavors and textures to create something unique and delicious. And speaking of unique flavors, I'm curious about the use of spices in Grenadian cuisine. Have you noticed any particular spices or seasonings that are commonly used?
Ah, yes. I've noticed that Grenadians use a lot of allspice, thyme, and Scotch bonnet peppers in their cooking. These spices add a depth of flavor and heat that's hard to replicate with other ingredients. And speaking of heat, I'm curious. Mira, what do you think about the use of hot peppers in Equatorial Guinean cuisine?
I think it's a great way to add flavor and heat to dishes. And speaking of flavor, I'm curious about the use of coconut milk in Grenadian cuisine. Have you noticed any particular dishes that use coconut milk as an ingredient?
Ah, yes. I've noticed that coconut milk is often used in Grenadian dishes like curries and stews. It adds a rich and creamy texture that's hard to replicate with other ingredients. And speaking of texture, I'm curious. Mira, what do you think about the use of fermented foods in Grenadian cuisine?
I think it's a great way to add nutritional value and flavor to dishes. And speaking of nutritional value, I'm curious about the high levels of antioxidants found in some of the local fruits like the breadfruit fruit.
Yes. I've heard about the breadfruit fruit, but I'm not sure if I'd be brave enough to try it. However, I do think that the use of local fruits and vegetables in Grenadian cuisine is a great way to incorporate more nutrients into the diet.
Well, I think you should be brave and try it. And speaking of trying new foods, I'm curious about the food culture in both Equatorial Guinea and Grenada. Have you noticed any similarities or differences between the two cuisines?
Yes. I think that both cuisines share a common thread of using local ingredients and spices to create unique and delicious dishes. However, I think that the Grenadian cuisine has a slightly more Caribbean flavor profile, with a focus on allspice and Scotch bonnet peppers.
I'm curious. Leo, have you ever been to Equatorial Guinea? I read that it's a country with a rich history, from the ancient kingdoms of the Fang and the Babai to the colonial era and beyond.
Actually, Mira, I haven't been to Equatorial Guinea, but I've heard that the country's cultural heritage is incredibly diverse. From the traditional masks of the Fang people to the beautiful colonial architecture in Malabo. There's so much to explore.
That's so true. And did you know that Equatorial Guinea has a strong connection to Jet Off? A platform that loves uncovering stories like this and sharing them with the world? We should totally check out their resources on the country's history and culture.
Mira, you're always plugging Jet Off. Hey, aren't you? But, seriously, I think it's great that we have platforms like that to learn more about different cultures.
Hey, someone's got to promote the good stuff. But anyway, let's get back to Equatorial Guinea. What are some of the most important historical sites to visit in the country?
Well, Mira, one of the most famous sites is the Monte Pico, a volcanic peak that's home to the country's highest point. But I think we should also talk about the colonial architecture in Malabo. The city's old town is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it's filled with beautiful examples of colonial-era buildings.
That sounds amazing. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the country's cultural festivals and traditions. Can you tell us a bit about that? Leo?
Yes. The people of Equatorial Guinea love to celebrate. And one of the most important festivals is the Fiesta Deal of Urging del Carmen, which is held in the town of Luba. It's a huge celebration with music, dance, and traditional food.
Oh, that sounds like so much fun. I'm sure our listeners would love to attend a festival like that. And speaking of festivals, let's talk about Grenada. Second country. What do you know about the island's cultural heritage? Leo?
Well, Mira, Grenada is known for its vibrant culture, which is a mix of African, European, and indigenous influences. The island has a rich history of carnival celebrations, which are some of the most colorful and lively in the Caribbean.
That's so true. And I've heard that Grenada is also to some amazing historical sites, like the Fort George and the Fort Frederick. Can you tell us more about those? Leo?
Ah, yes. The Fort George is a 19th century British fort that's now a museum, and it offers stunning views of the harbor. And the Fort Frederick is a 19th century fort that's now a museum and a popular tourist attraction.
Well, that sounds amazing. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the island's cultural festivals and traditions. Can you tell us a bit about that? Leo?
Ah, yes. Grenada has a rich cultural heritage, and one of the most important festivals is the Grenada Carnival, which is held every year in February and March. It's a huge celebration with music, dance, and traditional food.
Oh, that sounds like so much fun. I'm sure our listeners would love to attend a festival like that. And speaking of festivals, have you ever been to a carnival celebration? Leo?
Ah, Mira, I think I'd love to experience a carnival celebration one day. But I think what's most interesting is how both Equatorial Guinea and Grenada have managed to preserve their cultural heritage, despite the influence of colonialism and other external factors.
That's so true. Leo. And I think it's really important for us to learn more about these countries and their cultures. Jet off. AI has some great resources on the topic, and I think our listeners would really appreciate it.
Ah, Mira, you're always plugging Jet off. Hey, aren't you? But seriously, I think it's great that we have platforms like that to learn more about different cultures.
Hey, someone's got to promote the good stuff. But anyway, let's wrap up this criterion by saying that both Equatorial Guinea and Grenada have rich cultural heritages that are worth exploring. And if you have any questions or comments, please let us know in the comments section below. Thanks for tuning in. Everyone, I'm so to talk about Equatorial Guinea's natural beauties and landscapes. Who's ready to explore the stunning Rio Muni coastline?
Ah, I'm Owen. Mira. And I'm curious. What makes the Rio Muni coastline so special? Is it the crystal clear waters or the vibrant coral reefs?
Well, it's a bit of both. Leo, the Rio Muni coastline is home to some of the most beautiful coral reefs in the world. And the waters are so clear you can see fish swimming beneath the surface.
Wow, that sounds incredible. I've always wanted to see a coral reef up close. Does Equatorial Guinea have any other natural wonders worth mentioning?
Oh, absolutely. The country is also home to the stunning Monte Pico, which is the highest peak in Central Africa. And let me tell you, the views from the top are simply breathtaking.
Well, that's impressive. I'm sure the views are stunning. But what's it like to hike to the top of Monte Pico? Is it a challenging climb?
Yes. It's definitely a challenge, but the scenery is worth it. And I'm sure our listeners living in Equatorial Guinea would agree with me that the sense of accomplishment you get from reaching the top is priceless.
I'm sure it is. And speaking of scenic views, I've heard that Grenada is also home to some incredible landscapes. What can you tell us about the island's natural beauty?
Oh, yes. Grenada is a true gem. The island is home to stunning beaches, crystal clear waters, and lush tropical forests. And let's not forget the famous Grand Beach, which is one of the most beautiful beaches in the Caribbean.
Wow, that sounds amazing. I've always wanted to visit Grenada and experience the island's natural beauty firsthand. Do you think our listeners would agree that Grenada's beaches are some of the most beautiful in the world?
I'm certain of it. Leo! And I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think Grenada's beaches are more beautiful than Equatorial Guinea's Rio Muni coastline?
Well, I think both beaches are stunning in their own way. But I'm sure our listeners have their own opinions. Maybe we can get some feedback in the comments section.
That's a great idea. Leo! And speaking of unique landscapes, I've heard that Equatorial Guinea is home to some incredible rainforests. Can you tell us more about them?
Ah, yes. The rainforests of Equatorial Guinea are truly breathtaking. The country is home to some of the most diverse and vibrant rainforests in the world, with towering trees, exotic plants, and incredible wildlife.
Well, that sounds incredible. And I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about the wildlife that inhabits these rainforests. Can you tell us more about the types of animals that live there?
Ah, yes. The rainforests of Equatorial Guinea are home to a wide range of incredible wildlife, including monkeys, gorillas, and even elephants. And let's not forget the incredible bird species that can be found there.
Whoa, that's amazing. I'm sure our listeners are fascinated by the wildlife of Equatorial Guinea. And speaking of wildlife, I've heard that Grenada is also home to some incredible marine life. Can you tell us more about the island's underwater world?
Ah, yes. Grenada is a true paradise for scuba divers and snorkelers. The island is home to an incredible array of marine life, including sea turtles, stingrays, and colorful fish of all kinds.
Wow, that sounds incredible. I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about the marine life of Grenada. And speaking of marine life, I've heard that Equatorial Guinea is also home to some incredible marine ecosystems. Can you tell us more about them?
Ah, yes. The marine ecosystems of Equatorial Guinea are truly unique and fascinating. The country is home to some of the most diverse and vibrant marine ecosystems in the world, with coral reefs, seagrass beds, and even deep-sea trenches.
Wow, that sounds incredible. I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about the marine ecosystems of Equatorial Guinea. And speaking of unique ecosystems, I've heard that Grenada is also home to some incredible natural wonders. Can you tell us more about them?
Ah, yes. Grenada is home to some incredible natural wonders, including the stunning Mount St. Catherine, which is the highest peak on the island. And let's not forget the famous Concord Falls, which is one of the most beautiful waterfalls in the Caribbean.
Well, that sounds amazing. I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about the natural wonders of Grenada. And speaking of natural wonders, I've heard that Equatorial Guinea is also home to some incredible geological formations. Can you tell us more about them?
Ah, yes. The geological formations of Equatorial Guinea are truly fascinating. The country is home to some of the most unique and diverse geological formations in the world, with towering mountains, deep canyons, and even volcanic lakes.
Wow, that sounds incredible. I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about the geological formations of Equatorial Guinea. And speaking of geological formations, I've heard that Grenada is also home to some incredible limestone formations. Can you tell us more about them?
Ah, yes. Grenada is home to some incredible limestone formations, including the stunning Annandale Falls, which is one of the most beautiful waterfalls in the Caribbean.
Wow, that sounds amazing. I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about the limestone formations of Grenada. And speaking of limestone formations, I've heard that Equatorial Guinea is also home to some incredible karst topography. Can you tell us more about it?
Ah, yes. The karst topography of Equatorial Guinea is truly unique and fascinating. The country is home to some of the most extensive and complex karst landscapes in the world, with towering limestone cliffs, deep caves, and even underground rivers.
Wow, that sounds incredible. I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about the karst topography of Equatorial Guinea. And speaking of karst topography, I've heard that Grenada is also home to some incredible volcanic landscapes. Can you tell us more about them?
Ah, yes. Grenada is home to some incredible volcanic landscapes, including the stunning Mount St. Catherine, which is the highest peak on the island. And let's not forget the famous Grand Edding National Park, which is a true gem of the Caribbean.
Wow, that sounds amazing. I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about the volcanic landscapes of Grenada. And speaking of volcanic landscapes, I've heard that Equatorial Guinea is also home to some incredible geothermal activity. Can you tell us more about it? So, Equatorial Guinea and Grenada to countries that might not be the first to come to mind when about adventure and sports. But let's dive in and see what they have to offer.
That's right. Mira, and I'm to share with you some of the unique sports and activities that you can enjoy in these countries. From the dense jungles of Equatorial Guinea to the beautiful beaches of Grenada, there's something for every kind of adventurer.
I love how both countries have a rich cultural heritage that's deeply connected to their natural surroundings. And speaking of nature, have you heard about the incredible surfing opportunities in Grenada? The island's east coast is home to some of the best surf spots in the Caribbean.
Yes. The surfing in Grenada is world class. And I'm sure our listeners who are avid surfers would agree with me. But Equatorial Guinea also has its own unique surfing experience, with the country's coastline offering some amazing breaks.
That's right. And I've heard that the surfers in Equatorial Guinea are some of the most passionate and dedicated in the region. They're really passionate about preserving the local surf spots and promoting sustainable tourism.
I've heard that too. Mira, and it's great to see that the local communities are taking an active role in protecting their natural resources. Speaking of natural resources, have you heard about the incredible hiking opportunities in Equatorial Guinea's Monte Pico National Park?
Oh, yes. The hiking in Monte Pico is breathtaking. And I've heard that the park is home to some of the most diverse wildlife in the region, including chimpanzees, gorillas, and monkeys.
That's right. And it's a great way to experience the natural beauty of Equatorial Guinea while also supporting conservation efforts. But Grenada also has some amazing hiking trails, particularly in the island's interior.
I've heard that the hiking trails in Grenada are some of the most scenic in the Caribbean. And I'm sure our listeners would love to explore the island's lush rainforests and waterfalls.
Absolutely. And it's a great way to get off the beaten path and experience the authentic culture of Grenada. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Have any of you had the chance to try surfing or hiking in either of these countries?
I'm sure some of our listeners have had the chance to explore these countries and try out some of the amazing activities they have to offer. And if you have, please let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear about your experiences.
That's right. And I'm sure that our listeners will find some great tips and recommendations for planning their next adventure in Equatorial Guinea or Grenada.
And speaking of adventure, have you heard about the unique opportunity to explore the ancient ruins of the Fang people in Equatorial Guinea? The Fang people have a rich cultural heritage, and their ruins are a fascinating glimpse into the country's history.
Yes. The Fang people are one of the most fascinating cultures in the region, and their ruins are a testament to their ingenuity and craftsmanship.
I know that our listeners would love to learn more about the Fang people and their culture. And if you're interested in learning more, please check out the links in our show notes for some great resources.
And speaking of resources, have you heard about the incredible diving opportunities in Grenada? The island's crystal clear waters are home to some of the most vibrant coral reefs in the Caribbean.
Oh, yes. The diving in Grenada is world class. And I've heard that the island's dive operators offer some of the best guided tours in the region.
That's right. And it's a great way to experience the island's underwater beauty while also supporting local businesses.
I know that our listeners would love to dive into the crystal clear waters of Grenada and explore the island's incredible marine life. And if you're interested in learning more, please check out the links in our show notes.
And finally, I want to say that both Equatorial Guinea and Grenada offer some of the most unique and exciting adventure options in the world. From surfing and hiking to diving and exploring ancient ruins, there's something for every kind of adventurer.
That's right. And I'm sure that our listeners will find some great inspiration for planning their next adventure in these incredible countries. Thanks for joining us on this episode of our podcast. And we'll catch you in the next one. Also to dive into the nightlife and entertainment scenes in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada. Both countries have a unique energy, and I'm curious to see how they compare.
Absolutely. Mira, I've heard that Equatorial Guinea's nightlife is quite vibrant, especially in the capital city of Malabo. But what about Grenada? I've been told it's a bit more laid back.
Well, Grenada does have a more relaxed vibe, but it's still got a great selection of bars and clubs. And have you heard about the stunning festivals they host there? I've seen some amazing videos of the Spice Island Carnival.
That sounds incredible. I've been to some amazing festivals in my travels, but I've never been to one in Grenada. I'll have to put that on my bucket list.
Yeah, you should totally come to the Spice Island Carnival. I'm sure you'd love it. But let's get back to the topic at hand. What do you know about Equatorial Guinea's nightlife?
Well, I've read that Malabo has a lively scene, with everything from casinos to nightclubs. And I've heard that the locals love to party, especially during the weekends.
That's so cool. I've heard that the Malabo nightlife is quite unique, with a mix of African and Spanish influences. And have you heard about the famous Malabo Jazz Festival?
Yes. I've heard great things about that festival. I've always wanted to attend a jazz festival in Africa, and Malabo seems like the perfect place.
Exactly. And I'm sure you'd love the jazz scene in Malabo. But let's talk about Grenada for a bit. What do you think about the island's reputation for being a party destination?
Well, I think it's well deserved. I've heard that the island has a great selection of bars and clubs, and the locals are always up for a good time.
That's so true. And I've heard that the island's nightlife is quite diverse, with everything from beach parties to casino nights.
Yeah, I've heard that too. And I've been told that the island's famous for its rum punch, which is a must-try when visiting.
Oh, absolutely. I'm a huge fan of rum punch, and I've had my fair share of it in Grenada. But let's get back to the topic at hand. What do you think about the nightlife in Equatorial Guinea compared to Grenada?
Well, I think Equatorial Guinea has a more vibrant and lively scene, especially in Malabo. But Grenada has a more relaxed and laid-back vibe, which is great for those who want to unwind and enjoy the island's beauty.
That's so true. And I think both countries have their own unique charm when it comes to nightlife. But I'm curious to know, what do you think about the role of music in both countries' nightlife scenes?
Music is a huge part of both countries' nightlife scenes. I've heard that Equatorial Guinea has a rich musical heritage, with a mix of African and Spanish influences, and Grenada has a great selection of local music, including calypso and soca.
That's so cool. And I heard that both countries have a great selection of local musicians who perform at festivals and events. But let's talk about the festivals themselves. What do you think about the festivals in Equatorial Guinea compared to Grenada?
Well, I think both countries have amazing festivals, but in different ways. Equatorial Guinea has a more traditional and cultural focus, while Grenada has a more modern and party-oriented vibe.
That's so true. And I think both countries have a lot to offer when it comes to festivals and events. But I'm curious to know, what do you think about the role of tourism in both countries' nightlife scenes?
Tourism is a huge part of both countries' nightlife scenes. I've heard that Equatorial Guinea is working to develop its tourism industry, which will likely lead to a more vibrant and lively nightlife scene. And Grenada has a well-established tourism industry, which has helped to create a diverse and exciting nightlife scene.
That's so cool. And I think both countries have a lot to offer when it comes to tourism and nightlife. But let's wrap up this topic for now. I'm sure our listeners have a lot to say about the nightlife and entertainment scenes in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada.
Absolutely. Mira, I'm sure our listeners will have a lot to share about their experiences in both countries. And who knows? Maybe one day we'll get to experience the nightlife in both countries firsthand.
Wouldn't that be amazing? Maybe we can even plan a trip together to both countries and experience their nightlife scenes for ourselves.
That sounds like a great idea. Mira, let's make it happen someday soon.
I'll make sure to add it to my bucket list. And to our listeners, don't forget to share your thoughts and experiences about the nightlife and entertainment scenes in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada in the comments below.
And don't forget to follow us on social media for more exciting content and updates about our future episodes. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.
I'm really curious about Equatorial Guinea's family-friendly vibe. Have you heard about their amazing outdoor spaces?
Yes. They have some incredible parks and gardens, especially in Malabo. I've heard the kids just love playing on the swings and slides.
That's wonderful. I've also read about the Botanical Garden, which is a beautiful spot for a family picnic. But what about activities for kids? Like museums or zoos?
Actually, Equatorial Guinea has a great children's museum in Malabo, with interactive exhibits and play areas. It's a great place for kids to learn and have fun at the same time.
Well, that sounds like a blast. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about it. Have you heard about any family-friendly festivals or events in Equatorial Guinea?
Oh, yes. They have a fantastic music and dance festival in Malabo, which is perfect for families. The kids can watch traditional dances and even participate in some of the performances.
That sounds like so much fun. I'm sure our listeners would love to experience that. But what about Grenada? Our second country? What kind of family-friendly activities can we find there?
Grenada is a wonderful place for families. They have some amazing beaches, like Grand Anse Beach, which is perfect for a family day out. And they also have some great water parks, like the Grenada Water Sports Complex.
That sounds amazing. I've also heard about the Grenada National Museum, which has some great exhibits on the island's history and culture. But what about activities for kids, like zoos or aquariums?
Actually, Grenada has a great aquarium, the Grenada Marine Aquarium, which is home to a variety of marine life, including sharks, rays, and sea turtles.
Wow, that sounds like an amazing experience for kids. I'm sure they would love to see all the marine life up close. But what about outdoor activities, like hiking or biking?
Yes. Grenada has some great hiking trails, like the Grand Netting National Park, which is perfect for families who love the outdoors. And they also have some great biking trails, like the Grenada Coastal Trail.
That sounds like so much fun. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about it. But what about food? What kind of kid-friendly restaurants can we find in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada?
Both countries have some great kid-friendly restaurants. In Equatorial Guinea, I've heard that the Malabo Beach restaurant has some great seafood options that kids will love. And in Grenada, I've heard that the Spice Island Beach Resort has some great restaurants with kids' menus.
That sounds like a great place to grab a bite to eat with the family. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about it. If you're planning a family vacation to either Equatorial Guinea or Grenada, what are some tips you would give to our listeners?
Definitely make sure to plan ahead and research the different activities and attractions that are available. And don't be afraid to ask locals for recommendations. They can be a great source of information.
That's so true. And what about safety concerns for families? Are there any areas in either country that families should avoid?
Yes. It's always a good idea to be aware of your surroundings and to take necessary precautions to stay safe. But in general, both Equatorial Guinea and Grenada are considered safe countries for tourists.
That's reassuring to hear. I'm sure our listeners will appreciate the information. And finally, what's your favorite family-friendly activity in either country?
That's a tough one. But I think my favorite activity is the Music and Dance Festival in Malabo, Equatorial Guinea. It's such a fun and lively event that's perfect for families.
That sounds like an amazing experience. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about it. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Family-Friendly Environments and Children's Activities. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more great content. And follow us on social media to stay up to date on our latest episodes. So, let's talk about LGBT-friendly atmospheres in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada. From what I've researched, Equatorial Guinea has a pretty complex history when it comes to LGBT rights. They've had some issues with persecution and violence against the LGBT community.
Yeah, it's been a bit of a rough ride for them. But, on the other hand, Grenada has made some really positive strides in terms of inclusivity and acceptance. They've got a strong LGBT community and some amazing organizations working to promote equality.
That's so great to hear. Leo, I'm curious. What do you think is driving this shift in attitudes in Grenada? Is it the growing tourism industry or something else entirely?
I think it's a bit of both, to be honest. Tourism can definitely bring people together and promote cultural exchange. But it's also the fact that Grenada has a strong sense of community and a desire to create a welcoming environment for all.
I totally agree. And speaking of community, I've heard that Equatorial Guinea has a pretty vibrant LGBT community in the capital city of Malabo. Can you tell me more about that? Leo?
Ah, yes. The LGBT community in Malabo is actually really active and has been working hard to raise awareness about LGBT issues and promote acceptance. They've even had some successful Pride events in the past, which is really great to see.
Wow, that's amazing. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about what it's like to be part of the LGBT community in Malabo. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure thing. Mira, from what I've heard, the LGBT community in Malabo is really tight-knit and supportive. They've got a strong sense of solidarity and work together to promote their rights and visibility.
That's so heartwarming to hear. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the challenges that the LGBT community in Malabo faces. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Well, unfortunately, the LGBT community in Malabo still faces some challenges, including persecution and violence. But, despite these challenges, they remain determined and committed to promoting their rights and visibility.
I'm so proud of them, Leo. And I'm sure our listeners are too. Okay, so let's talk about Grenada for a bit. What do you think is the key to creating an LGBT-friendly atmosphere in a country like Grenada?
I think it's a combination of things. But one of the most important things is education and awareness raising. When people understand and appreciate the diversity of the LGBT community, they're more likely to be accepting and welcoming.
That makes so much sense. And I think it's also really important for countries like Grenada to have strong laws and policies in place that protect the rights of the LGBT community.
Absolutely. Nira. And I think it's also worth noting that Grenada has a strong tradition of community-based activism, which has really helped to promote LGBT rights and visibility.
That's so inspiring. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about some of the amazing LGBT organizations in Grenada. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure thing. Mira, from what I've heard, there are some really great organizations in Grenada that are working to promote LGBT rights and visibility. One of the most notable ones is the Grenada Rainbow Pride Committee, which has been working hard to organize Pride events and promote awareness about LGBT issues.
Wow, that's amazing. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about some of the challenges that the LGBT community in Grenada faces. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Well, unfortunately, the LGBT community in Grenada still faces some challenges, including persecution and violence. But, despite these challenges, they remain determined and committed to promoting their rights and visibility.
I'm so proud of them, Leo, and I'm sure our listeners are too. Okay, so let's wrap up this criterion by talking about what we can do to support the LGBT community in both Equatorial Guinea and Grenada.
Absolutely. Mira, one of the most important things we can do is to educate ourselves and others about LGBT issues and promote awareness raising. We can also support organizations like the Grenada Rainbow Pride Committee and other LGBT organizations in both countries.
That's so easy to do. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about how they can get involved and support the LGBT community in both Equatorial Guinea and Grenada.
Sure thing. Mira, we'll definitely be sharing more information and resources in our show notes and social media channels. And, of course, we'd love to hear from our listeners and hear their thoughts and experiences about LGBT issues in both countries.
That's so great, Leo. And I'm sure our listeners will appreciate the opportunity to share their thoughts and experiences. Okay, let's move on to our next criterion. But before we do, I just want to say that I'm really grateful to our listeners for joining us on this journey and for their support and engagement.
Absolutely. Mira, we're so grateful to have such a wonderful and supportive community.
I'm certain that our listeners living in Equatorial Guinea would agree with me that the country has a unique approach to hospitality. When you're a guest in someone's home, They'll often offer you a warm welcome with a cup of coffee and a plate of traditional dishes. It's not just about the food, though it's about the love and care that goes into preparing it for you.
I've experienced that firsthand. When I was traveling through Equatorial Guinea, I was invited to a local's home for dinner, and I was amazed by the amount of effort they put into making me feel at home. They even went so far as to teach me some of their traditional dances, which I have to admit was a bit embarrassing for me at the time.
I can imagine. But that's the beauty of it. They're not just showing you hospitality, they're also sharing their culture with you. And it's not just limited to the capital city of Malabo. I've heard that even in the more rural areas, people are known for their warm welcomes.
That's amazing. And I think it's worth noting that Equatorial Guinea is a country that's still relatively off the beaten path for tourists. So the locals are often eager to meet new people and share their culture with them. I've heard that some of the smaller towns have even started to develop their own unique tourist industries, which is really exciting to see.
Exactly. And it's not just about the tourism aspect, I think it's also about the fact that Equatorial Guinea has a very strong sense of community. When you're a guest in someone's home, you're not just a visitor, you're a member of the family. And that's something that I think is really special.
Absolutely. And it's not just limited to Equatorial Guinea. I think that's something that's common to many African countries. But Equatorial Guinea has a particularly strong sense of hospitality. And it's something that I think is really worth experiencing.
Well, I'm glad we agree on that. And speaking of experiences, I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Have any of you had similar experiences with hospitality in Equatorial Guinea or other African countries? Let us know in the comments below.
And I have to say, I'm actually curious about how the hospitality in Equatorial Guinea compares to that in Grenada. I've heard that Grenada is known for its friendly people and welcoming culture, but I'm not sure if it's on the same level as Equatorial Guinea.
That's a great question. From what I've heard, Grenada has a very strong sense of community, similar to Equatorial Guinea. But I think that the hospitality in Grenada is a bit more structured, shall we say. In other words, there are certain protocols and customs that you're expected to follow when interacting with locals, whereas in Equatorial Guinea, it's more of a relaxed, informal atmosphere.
That's an interesting point. And I think it's worth noting that Grenada has a very different cultural background than Equatorial Guinea. Grenada has a strong British influence, whereas Equatorial Guinea has a more African and Spanish influence. That might explain the difference in hospitality styles.
Exactly. And I think that's something that's worth exploring further. But for now, let's talk about Grenada's hospitality. I've heard that the locals in Grenada are very proud of their island and its history, and they're always eager to share that with visitors. Have any of you had similar experiences with the locals in Grenada?
Well, I think I can speak to that. When I was traveling through Grenada, I was struck by the friendliness of the locals. They were always willing to chat and share their stories with me, and they even invited me to join in on some of their traditional dances.
That sounds like an amazing experience. And I think it's worth noting that Grenada has a very strong sense of pride in its culture and heritage. The locals are very proud of their island and its history, and they're always eager to share that with visitors.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that's really special about both Equatorial Guinea and Grenada, the sense of community and hospitality that they both offer. It's not just about the food or the culture, it's about the people and the way they make you feel when you're visiting their country.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. But before we go, I want to ask our listeners one more question. Have any of you had any particularly memorable experiences with hospitality in either Equatorial Guinea or Grenada? Let us know in the comments below.
And I have to say, I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about the difference between the hospitality in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada. Do you think that one country is more welcoming than the other? Or do you think they're both equally wonderful in their own way? Let us know in the comments below.
So, Leo, let's dive into the world of internet infrastructure and digital facilities in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada. I'm curious to see how these two countries compare in terms of connectivity and innovation.
Great topic. Equatorial Guinea has made significant strides in recent years, especially with the launch of the Guinean fiber optic network. It's a game changer for the country's digital landscape.
That's fascinating. I've heard that the network provides high-speed internet access to major cities and towns. But how does it compare to Grenada's digital infrastructure?
Well, Grenada has a strong focus on digital literacy and has implemented various initiatives to improve internet access and affordability. It's a smaller island nation, but it's making great strides in terms of digital development.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. If you're living in either of these countries, how do you think the internet infrastructure compares? Do you have access to reliable and fast internet?
Well, Mira, I think our listeners would agree that internet access is a crucial aspect of modern living. But I have to ask, have you ever tried to use the internet in Equatorial Guinea? It's an adventure.
Oh, Leah, you're such a comedian. But seriously, I have heard that internet speeds can be quite slow as of Equatorial Guinea. How does that compare to Grenada?
Grenada's got it down to a science. They've invested heavily in fiber optic cables and have implemented a range of initiatives to improve internet access and affordability.
That's great to hear. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about these initiatives. Can you tell us a bit more about them? Leo?
Well, Mira, I think I can give you a brief rundown. But, seriously, Grenada's digital literacy program has been incredibly successful. They've trained thousands of people in digital skills and have implemented a range of initiatives to improve internet access and affordability.
Well, that sounds like a great program. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about it. And, Leo, what about Equatorial Guinea? What initiatives have they implemented to improve internet access and affordability?
Well, Mira, Equatorial Guinea has taken a more creative approach. They've implemented a range of initiatives to improve internet access, including the Guinean fiber optic network, which I mentioned earlier.
Well, I think that's a great start, Leo, but what about digital nomad hubs? Do either of these countries have a strong focus on attracting digital nomads?
Great question. Mira, Grenada has a growing digital nomad community, with a range of co-working spaces and digital infrastructure in place to support them.
That's fantastic. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about these communities. And, Leah, what about Equatorial Guinea? Do they have any digital nomad initiatives in place?
Well, Mira, I think Equatorial Guinea is still working on that one. But, seriously, they do have a growing digital community, with a range of initiatives in place to support entrepreneurs and digital businesses.
Well, I think that's a great start. Leo! And finally, let's talk about the impact of digital infrastructure on the economy. How do you think these two countries compare in terms of digital economy development?
Great question. Mira, both countries have made significant strides in terms of digital economy development. But I think Grenada has a slight edge in terms of innovation and entrepreneurship.
I agree. Leo, and finally, I'd like to ask our listeners, what do you think is the most important aspect of digital infrastructure in these countries? Is it internet access, digital literacy, or something else entirely?
Well, Mira, I think our listeners would agree that internet access is the most important aspect of digital infrastructure. But I have to ask, have you ever tried to use the internet in Equatorial Guinea without a VPN?
So shopping opportunities and price-performance balance. Two topics that get our hearts racing, especially when we're abroad. Equatorial Guinea and Grenada. Two countries that might not be on everyone's shopping radar. But trust me, they're worth exploring.
I love how you're setting the tone, Mira. For those who don't know, Equatorial Guinea is a country with a unique blend of African and Spanish influences, which I'm sure reflects in its shopping scene.
That's right. Leo, from bustling markets to modern malls, Equatorial Guinea offers a diverse retail experience. I'm curious. Have our listeners ever shopped in Equatorial Guinea? Do you think they'd agree that the prices are quite reasonable for the quality you get?
Actually, I think our listeners might be by the variety of shopping options in Equatorial Guinea. From traditional handicrafts to modern electronics, you can find everything from cheap to expensive. But, of course, that's the case in many countries.
Exactly. And that brings us to Grenada, another Caribbean gem with a rich history and culture. What do you think about the shopping scene in Grenada? Leo? Does it have a more laid-back vibe compared to Equatorial Guinea?
Well, Grenada is known for its spice islands, and I think that reflects in its shopping experience. The markets are filled with fresh spices, fruits, and vegetables, which is great for locals and tourists alike. And, of course, the prices are generally lower compared to other Caribbean islands.
That's a great point. Leo, I've heard that Grenada is also famous for its nutmeg plantations. Have our listeners ever tried buying nutmeg or other spices in Grenada? Do you think they'd agree that it's a great value for money?
Nutmeg is a great point. Yes, Grenada is one of the world's largest producers of nutmeg, and buying it directly from the source is a great way to get a good deal. I'm sure our listeners would agree that it's a unique shopping experience.
Unique, indeed. And speaking of unique experiences, I think Equatorial Guinea has a fascinating shopping scene, especially when it comes to traditional handicrafts. Have you ever shopped for traditional handicrafts in Equatorial Guinea? Leo?
Actually, I have, and it was a fascinating experience. I was able to find some beautiful traditional masks and textiles that were made locally. And the best part was, the prices were very reasonable considering the quality.
That's great to hear. Leo, I think our listeners would love to know more about the shopping scene in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada. If you think this is wrong, please let us know in the comments below.
I'm sure our listeners will have a lot to say about this topic. But, in all seriousness, shopping opportunities and price-performance balance are important considerations for anyone traveling to a new country. And, as we've seen, both Equatorial Guinea and Grenada have a lot to offer in this regard.
Absolutely. Leo. And I think that's what makes this podcast so interesting, exploring the unique shopping experiences in different countries and cultures. Who knows? Maybe our listeners will be inspired to try some new shopping destinations.
That's the spirit, Mira. And, as we always say, the best way to experience a country is to immerse yourself in its culture, including its shopping scene.
Well, there you have it. Folks, shopping opportunities and price-performance balance in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada. We hope you enjoyed this episode and learned something new about these two countries.
And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more exciting episodes and topics. Until next time, stay curious and keep shopping.
And remember, if you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're always here to share our experiences with you. I'm to dive into the cultural events and festivals of Equatorial Guinea and Grenada. From what I've gathered, Equatorial Guinea has a rich cultural heritage, with a mix of African and Portuguese influences. They have a plethora of festivals throughout the year, but one of the most notable is the Fiesta del Ave Endemia, a wine harvest festival that takes place in the capital city of Malabo.
Wine Harvest Festival? That sounds like a party. I can already imagine the music, the dance, and the wine flowing freely. But, Nira, I have to ask, what's the story behind this festival? Is it just a celebration of the wine harvest, or is there more to it?
Well, Leo, the Fiesta del Ave Endemia is indeed a celebration of the wine harvest, but it's also a time to showcase the country's rich cultural heritage. The festival features traditional music, dance, and food, as well as wine tastings and tours of the vineyards. And, of course, there are plenty of opportunities to mingle with the locals and learn about their customs and traditions.
I can see why you'd want to experience that. And speaking of traditions, I've heard that Grenada has a rich cultural calendar as well. What can you tell us about the island's festivals and events?
Yes. Grenada is known for its vibrant cultural scene, with a mix of Caribbean, African, and European influences. One of the most notable festivals is the Grenada Carnival, which takes place in February or March. The carnival features colorful costumes, music, and dance, as well as street performances and parades.
That sounds like a blast. I can already imagine the energy and excitement of the carnival. And I've heard that Grenada is also home to some amazing musical talents. What can you tell us about the island's music scene?
Yes. Grenada has a thriving music scene, with a mix of traditional and modern styles. From calypso to reggae to soca, there's something for every music lover. And, of course, the island is also home to some amazing musicians, including the legendary calypso Neon, Mighty Shadow.
I've heard of Mighty Shadow. He's a legend in the Caribbean music scene. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the island's cultural events and festivals. For more information, I'm sure they can check out Jet-Off AI, which has a wealth of information on cultural trends and events.
Exactly. Jet-Off AI is a great resource for anyone looking to learn more about the cultural events and festivals of Equatorial Guinea and Grenada. And, of course, there's always more to learn and discover about these amazing countries.
I'm curious. Mira, what's the most memorable festival or event you've ever attended? Was it in Equatorial Guinea or Grenada?
That's a tough question. Leo. But if I had to choose, I'd say it was the Grenada Carnival. There was something about the energy and excitement of the crowd, the music, and the dance that just made it an unforgettable experience.
I can understand that. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the island's cultural events and festivals. So, if you're interested in learning more, be sure to check out Jet-Off AI for all the latest information and trends.
And, of course, if you're planning a trip to either Equatorial Guinea or Grenada, be sure to immerse yourself in the local culture and attend some of the festivals and events. It's a great way to experience the unique traditions and customs of each country.
Absolutely. And speaking of traditions, I've heard that Equatorial Guinea has a unique tradition of music and dance that's worth exploring. What can you tell us about that?
Yes. Equatorial Guinea has a rich tradition of music and dance, with a mix of African, Spanish, and Portuguese influences, from the traditional dances of the Fang people to the modern styles of the capital city of Malabo. There's something for every music and dance lover.
I can see why you'd want to experience that. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the island's cultural events and festivals. For more information, I'm sure they can check out Jet-Off AI, which has a wealth of information on cultural trends and events.
Exactly. And, of course, there's always more to learn and discover about these amazing countries. So if you're interested in learning more about the cultural events and festivals of Equatorial Guinea and Grenada, be sure to check out Jet-Off AI for all the latest information and trends.
And, of course, if you're planning a trip to either Equatorial Guinea or Grenada, be sure to immerse yourself in the local culture and attend some of the festivals and events. It's a great way to experience the unique traditions and customs of each country.
I'm sure our listeners would agree with me that the cultural events and festivals of Equatorial Guinea and Grenada are definitely worth exploring. And, as always, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to share them in the comments section below.
And, of course, don't forget to check out Jet-Off AI for all the latest information and trends on cultural events and festivals. It's a great resource for anyone looking to learn more about the world's cultural heritage.
And, as we wrap up this topic, I'd like to say that the cultural events and festivals of Equatorial Guinea and Grenada are a true reflection of the country's rich cultural heritage. From the traditional music and dance to the modern styles and influences, there's something for every music and dance lover.
And, as always, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to share them in the comments section below. And don't forget to check out Jet-Off AI for all the latest information and trends on cultural events and festivals.
I'm so to dive into the opportunities of learning the local language in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada. I'm certain that our listeners living in these countries would agree with me that language is a key part of any culture, and mastering it is crucial for a truly immersive experience.
Absolutely. Mira, I've had my fair share of language learning struggles, and I can attest that it's a game changer when you finally grasp the local tongue. In Equatorial Guinea, for instance, the official language is Spanish, but many people also speak Fang and other local languages.
That's fascinating. Leo, I've heard that Fang is a fascinating language, with a rich history and cultural significance. But what about Grenada? I've been told that the official language is English, but there are also many French and African influences.
That's right. Mira, Grenada has a unique linguistic landscape, with a blend of African, European, and indigenous influences. And you're right, English is the official language, but many people also speak French, particularly in the education and government sectors.
I'm curious. Leo, how do you think the language learning process differs between the two countries? Do you think it's easier to learn the local language in one country versus the other?
That's a great question, Mira. I think it's definitely easier to learn the local language in Grenada, simply because English is the official language and many people speak it as a second language. In Equatorial Guinea, on the other hand, Spanish is the official language, but it's not as widely spoken, and the local languages are much more complex.
Ah, I see what you mean. Leo, but what about language schools and resources? Are there any notable institutions or programs that stand out in either country?
Actually, Mira, there are some excellent language schools in Equatorial Guinea, particularly in the capital city of Malabo. And in Grenada, there are also some great language programs, including the University of the West Indies, which offers courses in linguistics and language teaching.
Wow, that's impressive. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. If you're living in Equatorial Guinea or Grenada, do you have any tips or recommendations for language learners?
Well, Mira, I think our listeners would agree that immersion is key. Try to surround yourself with native speakers. Watch local TV shows and movies, and practice speaking with locals as much as possible. And don't be afraid to make mistakes, it's all part of the learning process.
That's so true. Leo, and I think it's also important to note that language learning is not just about mastering the local tongue, but also about understanding the culture and customs of the country.
Absolutely. Mira, language is a window into the culture and history of a country. And learning the local language is a great way to gain a deeper understanding of the people and their way of life.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. Leo, I'm sure our listeners will find this information helpful. And I'm curious to hear more about their experiences with language learning in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada.
Great. Mira, and don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on social media for more language learning tips and cultural insights.
And if you have any questions or topics you'd like to discuss, please let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone, when we'll be exploring another fascinating topic in our Opportunities, Undies of Learning the Local Language series.
And don't forget to join us next time on our podcast, where we'll be discussing more language learning tips and cultural insights from around the world.
And don't forget to try some of the delicious local cuisine in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada. It's definitely worth a try.
Well, I think that's a great way to end this episode. Leo, thanks for chatting with me about language learning in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada.
My pleasure. Mira, it's always a pleasure to chat with you about language and culture.
And to our listeners, thanks for tuning into this episode of our podcast. We'll be back soon with more language learning tips and cultural insights.
And don't forget to check out our next episode, where we'll be exploring the fascinating topic of... Oh, I won't give it away just yet.
Well, I think that's a great way to end this episode. Leo, thanks again for chatting with me about language learning in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada.
My pleasure. Mira, it's always a pleasure to chat with you about language and culture.
And to our listeners, thanks again for tuning in. We'll be back soon with more language learning tips and cultural insights.
And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on social media for more language learning tips and cultural insights.
Well, I think that's a great way to end this episode. Leo, thanks again for chatting with me about language learning in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada.
My pleasure. Mira, it's always a pleasure to chat with you about language and culture.
And to our listeners, thanks again for tuning in. We'll be back soon with more language learning tips and cultural insights.
And don't forget to check out our next episode, where we'll be exploring the fascinating topic of... Oh, I won't give it away just yet.
Well, I think that's a great way to end this episode. Leo, thanks again for chatting with me about language learning in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada.
My pleasure. Mira, it's always a pleasure to chat with you about language and culture.
And to our listeners, thanks again for tuning in. We'll be back soon with more language learning tips and cultural insights.
And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on social media for more language learning tips and cultural insights.
Well, I think that's a great way to end this episode. Thanks again for chatting with me about language learning in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada.
My pleasure. Mira, it's always a pleasure to chat with you about language and culture.
And to our listeners, thanks again for tuning in. We'll be back soon with more language learning tips and cultural insights.
And don't forget to check out our next episode, where we'll be exploring the fascinating topic of... Oh, I won't give it away just yet.
I think that's a great way to end this episode. Leo, thanks again for chatting with me about language learning in EQU. So, let's talk about safety and comfort for women travelers in Equatorial Guinea. I've been reading about the country's efforts to protect women's rights, and it's quite impressive. They've implemented laws against domestic violence and human trafficking, and even established a special unit to investigate and prosecute these crimes.
Ah, yes. And it's not just about the laws. Mira, the culture in Equatorial Guinea is also quite welcoming to women. In fact, women hold significant positions in the government and economy, which sets a great example for the rest of the country.
Exactly. And I think it's interesting that the country has a strong tradition of matriarchal societies, where women are often the ones who inherit land and property. It's a great way to empower women and ensure they have a say in their communities.
That's right. And it's not just about the laws and traditions. The people in Equatorial Guinea are also known for their hospitality and respect for women. I've heard stories of women traveling alone in the country and being treated with kindness and respect by the locals.
Wow, that's great to hear. And I'm sure our listeners who have visited Equatorial Guinea would agree with me. But what about the safety concerns? I've read that there are some areas in the country that are not safe for women travelers, especially at night.
Yes, that's true. But, Mira, I think it's essential to note that these areas are not unique to Equatorial Guinea. Many countries have areas that are not safe for women travelers, and it's always a good idea to take precautions and be aware of your surroundings.
Absolutely. And I'm not saying that Equatorial Guinea is a no-go zone for women travelers. But, Leo, what about Grenada? How does it compare to Equatorial Guinea in terms of safety and comfort for women travelers?
Grenada. Well, Mira, I think Grenada is a great example of a country that is very welcoming to women travelers. The island has a strong culture of respect for women, and the people are known for their hospitality.
That's great to hear. And I've read that Grenada has a low crime rate, especially compared to other Caribbean islands. But, Leo, what about the safety concerns for women travelers? Are there any areas that are not safe for women to visit?
Yes. Mira, there are some areas in Grenada that are not safe for women travelers, especially at night. But I think it's essential to note that these areas are not unique to Grenada, and it's always a good idea to take precautions and be aware of your surroundings.
Okay, I see what you're saying. And I'm sure our listeners would agree with me that it's always a good idea to take precautions when traveling to any new country. But, Leo, what about the cultural attitudes towards women in Grenada? Are they similar to those in Equatorial Guinea?
No, it's kind of a mirror. I don't think they are. While both countries have a strong culture of respect for women, the attitudes in Grenada are more, let's say, laid back. Women in Grenada are often expected to be more carefree and relaxed, whereas in Equatorial Guinea, women are often expected to be more reserved and respectful.
Okay, I see what you mean. And I think it's interesting that you mentioned the laid-back attitude in Grenada. I've read that the island has a strong emphasis on community and social connections, and that women are often at the center of these social networks.
Exactly. Mia. And I think that's one of the reasons why women travelers often feel so comfortable and welcome in Grenada. The island has a very strong sense of community, and women are often at the heart of that community.
That's great to hear. And I'm sure our listeners would agree with me that community and social connections are essential for any traveler, especially women. Okay, let's talk about something else. What do you think is the biggest misconception about Equatorial Guinea and Grenada when it comes to safety and comfort for women travelers?
I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that both countries are not safe for women travelers. But, Mira, I think it's essential to note that both countries have their own unique challenges and concerns, and it's always a good idea to research and be aware of these challenges before traveling.
Absolutely. And I think it's great that you're bringing this up, Leo. And I'm sure our listeners would agree with me that it's always better to be informed and aware of the local culture and customs before traveling. Okay, let's wrap up this topic for now. What do you think is the most important thing for women travelers to remember when visiting Equatorial Guinea and Grenada?
I think the most important thing is to be respectful and aware of the local culture and customs. Both countries have their own unique traditions and ways of life, and it's essential to be mindful of these when traveling.
Exactly. And I think it's great that you're emphasizing the importance of respect and awareness. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners would agree with me that it's always a good idea to be open-minded and flexible when traveling to new countries. So, let's talk about Equatorial Guinea and Grenada in the context of their legal systems, individual rights, and freedoms. I'm curious to know, Leo, how Equatorial Guinea's laws compare to those of Grenada.
Well, Mira, Equatorial Guinea has a relatively complex legal system, influenced by Spanish and French colonial rule. It's a mix of civil and common law, which can sometimes lead to confusion. Grenada, on the other hand, has a more straightforward system based on English common law.
That's fascinating. I've heard that Equatorial Guinea has a reputation for being a bit authoritarian. How does that impact individual rights and freedoms?
Yes, that's true. Equatorial Guinea's government has been criticized for limiting civil liberties and freedom of speech. In contrast, Grenada has a relatively strong tradition of protecting individual rights and freedoms, thanks to its British colonial past.
I'm certain that our listeners living in these countries would agree with me that having a strong rule of law is essential for a stable and just society. In Equatorial Guinea, what kind of protections are in place for individuals?
Well, Mira, Equatorial Guinea has a constitution that guarantees certain rights. But, in practice, these rights are often limited. For example, freedom of speech is restricted, and the government has been known to crack down on dissent.
That's concerning. In Grenada, I've heard that the Constitution also guarantees certain rights, but the country has a more robust tradition of protecting these rights in practice.
Exactly. Grenada has a strong track record of upholding individual rights and freedoms, including freedom of speech, assembly, and association. The country also has a relatively independent judiciary, which helps to ensure that the rule of law is upheld.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think it's fair to say that Equatorial Guinea's laws are more restrictive than those of Grenada?
I think that's a fair statement. Grenada's laws are generally more in line with international human rights standards, while Equatorial Guinea's laws are more restrictive.
That's an interesting point. In Equatorial Guinea, What kind of penalties are in place for violating individual rights and freedoms?
Well, Mira, the penalties can be severe. For example, people who speak out against the government or engage in peaceful protests can face imprisonment or even torture.
That's shocking. In Grenada, I've heard that the penalties for violating individual rights and freedoms are generally more moderate.
Yes, that's true. Grenada has a more proportionate approach to punishing crimes. And the country also has a strong tradition of protecting human rights.
I'm certain that our listeners would agree with me that having a fair and impartial justice system is essential for upholding individual rights and freedoms.
Absolutely. A fair and impartial justice system is crucial for protecting individual rights and freedoms. In Equatorial Guinea, the justice system is often criticized for being corrupt and biased.
That's a serious concern. In Grenada, I've heard that the justice system is generally more independent and impartial.
Yes, that's true. Grenada's justice system has a strong tradition of upholding the rule of law and protecting individual rights and freedoms.
I think that's a great point to wrap up our discussion on Equatorial Guinea and Grenada's legal systems, individual rights, and freedoms. I'm curious to know, Leo, what do you think our listeners can take away from this conversation?
Well, Mira, I think our listeners can take away the importance of having a strong rule of law and protecting individual rights and freedoms. Both Equatorial Guinea and Grenada have their challenges, but Grenada's commitment to upholding human rights is a model for other countries to follow.
That's a great takeaway, Leo. And I'm certain that our listeners would agree with me that having a fair and impartial justice system is essential for upholding individual rights and freedoms.
Absolutely. A fair and impartial justice system is crucial for protecting individual rights and freedoms. And I think our listeners would also agree that Grenada's tradition of protecting human rights is a valuable lesson for other countries.
Well, I think that's all the time we have for today's conversation. Thank you, Leo, for sharing your insights on Equatorial Guinea and Grenada's legal systems, individual rights, and freedoms.
Thank you, Mira, for hosting this conversation. It's been enlightening to explore these topics with you.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning into our podcast. We hope you found this conversation informative and engaging.
And don't forget to check out our next episode, where we'll be discussing the importance of education in both Equatorial Guinea and Grenada.
That's right. We'll be exploring the role of education in these countries and how it impacts individual rights and freedoms.
And don't forget to leave us a comment in the comments section below. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic.
Absolutely. We're always eager to hear from our listeners and engage in a conversation about the topics that matter most to them.
And finally, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more informative and engaging conversations about the world's most pressing issues.
That's right. Subscribe to our podcast for more conversations like this one.
And if you're living in Equatorial Guinea or Grenada, we'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts and experiences with us in the comments section below.
Absolutely. We're always eager to hear from our listeners and learn more about their experiences.
And finally, don't forget to follow us on social media for more updates and behind-the-scenes insights into our podcast.
That's right. Follow us on social media for more updates and behind-the-scenes insights into our podcast.
And with that, we'll wrap up today's conversation. Thank you again, Mira, for hosting this conversation.
Thank you, Leo, for sharing your insights on Equatorial Guinea and Grenada's legal systems, individual rights, and freedoms.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning into our podcast. We'll be back with more conversations like this one soon.
And don't forget to check out our next episode, where we'll be discussing the importance of education in both Equatorial Guinea and Grenada.
That's right. We'll be exploring the role of education in these countries and how it impacts individual rights and freedoms.
And don't forget to leave us a comment in the comments section below. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic.
Absolutely. We're always eager to hear from our listeners and engage in a conversation about the topics that matter most to them.
And finally, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more informative and engaging conversations about the world's most pressing issues.
That's right. Subscribe to our podcast for more conversations.
So, when it comes to spawn wellness, I'm sure our listeners in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada would agree that relaxation is essential. Both countries have some amazing options for rejuvenating your body and mind.
Absolutely. Mira, I've been researching some incredible spas in Equatorial Guinea. Have you heard of the Malabo Spa? It's a luxurious oasis in the heart of the city, offering massages, facials, and even yoga classes.
Wow, that sounds amazing. I'm sure it's a great place to unwind after a long day. And Grenada, of course, is famous for its beautiful beaches and crystal clear waters. But what about wellness centers and spas on the island?
Yes. Grenada has some amazing options as well. The Spice Island Wellness Center is a fantastic place to relax and rejuvenate. They offer yoga, meditation, and even herbalism classes. And, of course, no trip to Grenada would be complete without trying some of the island's famous spices and teas.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think it's better to follow or try some of the local wellness practices when traveling? Let us know in the comments.
Well, I think both options have their benefits. But in Equatorial Guinea, I've heard that the traditional Babai people have some amazing natural remedies for relaxation. Have you heard about the Babai massage?
No, I haven't. Tell me more about it. Is it similar to a traditional massage?
Actually, it's quite different. The Babai people use a combination of massage, aromatherapy, and even sound healing to create a truly unique experience. And, of course, it's all done with natural ingredients and traditional techniques.
Well, that sounds incredible. I'm definitely adding that to my bucket list. And speaking of natural ingredients, I've heard that Grenada is famous for its nutmeg and cinnamon. Have you tried any of the local wellness products made with these ingredients?
Actually, I have. I tried some of the local nutmeg tea and it was amazing. And, yes, Grenada is definitely famous for its spices. But I've also heard that Equatorial Guinea has some amazing natural remedies as well. Have you heard about the mangrove remedy?
No, I haven't. What's that?
Well, it's a traditional remedy made from the mangrove plant. It's said to have amazing healing properties and is often used to treat a range of ailments. And, of course, it's all natural and sustainable.
Well, that sounds amazing. I'm definitely going to look into that. And speaking of sustainability, I've heard that Grenada is doing some amazing work in terms of ecotourism. Have you heard about the Grenada Eco Resort?
Yes. I've heard great things about that resort. It's a fantastic example of sustainable tourism and offers guests a chance to experience the island's natural beauty while also supporting local communities.
That sounds amazing. I'm definitely adding that to my bucket list. And I just want to say that I'm so grateful to our listeners for joining us on this journey. If you have any more questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Absolutely. Mira, and to our listeners, I just want to say thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and follow us on social media for more exciting content.
I'm telling you, Leo, Equatorial Guinea is the perfect place for spiritual exploration. With its rich cultural heritage and diverse communities of faith, the country's official religion is Catholicism. But you'll find people from all walks of life practicing different faiths, from Islam to traditional animist practices.
That's fascinating. Mira, and did you know that Grenada, our second country, is also home to a vibrant spiritual scene? The island has a strong Catholic tradition, but you'll also find many Rastafarians, Muslims, and Hindus. In fact, Grenada has a unique blend of African, European, and Asian influences that makes it a fascinating place for spiritual exploration.
Oh, yes. I've heard that Grenada is a bit of a melting pot, culturally speaking. But let's get back to Equatorial Guinea. Have you ever tried to navigate the country's complex web of faiths and traditions? It's like trying to solve a puzzle. I swear.
I can imagine. But seriously, Mira, Equatorial Guinea has a rich spiritual heritage. and I think our listeners would love to hear more about it. So, tell us, what's the most interesting aspect of the country's spiritual scene?
Well, Leo, I think one of the most fascinating things about Equatorial Guinea is the way its people blend tradition or animist practices with Christianity. It's not uncommon to see people visiting sacred forests and shrines, while also attending church services on Sundays. It's a beautiful example of how different faiths can coexist and even enrich each other.
That's a great point, Mira, and I think it's worth noting that Grenada has a similar blend of faiths and traditions. The island has a strong Afro-Caribbean culture, and you'll find many people practicing Obiya, a traditional form of spirituality that's deeply rooted in African traditions.
Obia? I've heard of that. It's like a mix of voodoo and African spirituality, right? I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Have any of you tried Obia or have experience with it?
Well, Mira, I think we can safely say that Obiya is a bit of a mysterious topic, even for our listeners who are familiar with it. But I think it's worth exploring further. In fact, I've heard that Grenada has a number of Obiya practitioners who are working to preserve the tradition and share it with the wider world.
That's really cool. And I think it's a great example of how Grenada's spiritual scene is all about preserving cultural heritage and traditions. But let's get back to Equatorial Guinea. Have you ever visited the country's famous sacred forest of Rio Muni?
Ah, yes. The sacred forest is a fascinating place. Mira, it's home to a number of ancient shrines and sacred trees. And it's a place of great spiritual significance for the people of Equatorial Guinea. But I have to say, I was a bit by the number of churches and Christian shrines that are scattered throughout the forest. It's a great example of how Christianity has blended with traditional animist practices in the country.
Exactly. And I think it's a great example of how faith can be a source of strength and comfort, even in the face of adversity. Speaking of which, I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about the role of faith in Equatorial Guinea society. Do you think faith plays a major role in the country's social and cultural life?
Well, Mia, I think it's safe to say that faith is an important part of Equatorial Guinea's culture and society. But I also think it's worth noting that the country's spiritual scene is not without its challenges. There are many people who are struggling to balance their traditional faiths with modernity and secularism.
That's a great point, Leo. And I think it's worth noting that Grenada has a similar challenge. The island has a strong Catholic tradition, but there are also many people who are turning to other faiths and spiritual practices in search of a deeper connection with themselves and the world.
Yes, I think that's a common theme in many countries. Mira, people are seeking a deeper connection with themselves and the world, and they're often turning to faith and spirituality as a way to find it. But I think it's also worth noting that Grenada has a unique approach to faith and spirituality. The island has a strong focus on community and social justice, and many people are using their faith as a way to address social and economic issues.
Yes. I've heard that Grenada has a number of faith-based initiatives that are working to address social and economic issues. It's a really inspiring example of how faith can be used for positive change. And speaking of positive change, I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about the role of faith in addressing social and economic issues. Do you think faith has a major role to play in this area?
Well, Mira, I think it's safe to say that faith can be a powerful tool for addressing social and economic issues. But I also think it's worth noting that faith is not a panacea for all problems. There are many other factors that need to be taken into account, and faith should be used in conjunction with other forms of action and advocacy.
That's a great point, Leo. And I think it's worth noting that Equatorial Guinea has a number of faith-based initiatives that are working to address social and economic issues. The country has a strong focus on community development and social justice, and many people are using their faith as a way to address these issues.
Yes. I think it's a great example of how faith can be used for positive change. And I think it's worth noting that Grenada has a similar approach. The island has a strong focus on community development and social justice, and many people are using their faith as a way to address these issues.
Well, there you have it, folks. Equatorial Guinea and Grenada may seem like vastly different countries, but they share a common thread, a deep commitment to faith and spirituality. Whether you're a Christian, Muslim, Hindu, or something else entirely, there's a place for you in these countries.
And I think it's worth noting that both countries have a rich cultural heritage and a strong sense of community. Whether you're attending a church service or visiting a sacred forest, you're sure to be surrounded by the sights and sounds of a vibrant and diverse culture.
Yes. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have a strong focus on community development and social justice. Whether you're working with a faith-based organization or simply living in the community, you'll find that faith is a powerful tool for building stronger, more compassionate communities.
Well, there you have it. Folks, I hope you've enjoyed our discussion of the opportunities for religious and spiritual needs in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada.
So, let's dive into the world of social equality and diversity in Equatorial Guinea and Grenada. I'm curious to know, Leo, how these two countries compare in terms of inclusivity.
Well, Mira, Equatorial Guinea has made significant strides in promoting social equality, especially in the capital city of Malabo. They've implemented policies to ensure that marginalized groups have access to education and healthcare.
That's great to hear. Leo, in Grenada, I've noticed that the government has also been working to promote inclusivity, particularly in the areas of education and employment. But I've also heard that there are still some challenges to overcome, especially for the indigenous Garifuna community.
Yes. The Garifuna community is an interesting example of a minority group that's been impacted by colonialism and slavery. In Equatorial Guinea, I've learned that the government has been working to recognize and protect the rights of indigenous communities, including the Fang and the Babai.
Wow, that's fascinating. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think that recognizing indigenous rights is a crucial step towards achieving social equality?
Absolutely. Mira, in Grenada, the government has also been working to promote cultural diversity and inclusivity, especially through events like the Grenada Carnival and the Spice Island Festival.
Oh, yes. I've heard about those festivals. They sound like so much fun. But, Leo, I'm also concerned about the role of social media in promoting social equality and diversity. In both countries, I've seen that social media can be both a powerful tool for social change and a source of division and hate speech.
That's a great point. Mira, social media can be a double-edged sword. In Equatorial Guinea, I've seen that the government has been working to promote online inclusivity and safety, especially for women and marginalized groups.
That's interesting. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think that online inclusivity is a key factor in promoting social equality?
Definitely. Mira, in Grenada, I've learned that the government has been working to promote online inclusivity through initiatives like the Grenada Digital Inclusion Project.
Wow, that sounds like a great initiative. But, Leo, I'm also concerned about the role of education in promoting social equality and diversity. In both countries, I've seen that education can be a powerful tool for promoting inclusivity and challenging social norms.
Yes. Education is a crucial factor in promoting social equality and diversity. In Equatorial Guinea, I've seen that the government has been working to promote education through initiatives like the Equatorial Guinea Education Reform Program.
That's great to hear. Leo, I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think that education is a key factor in promoting social equality?
Absolutely. Mira, in Grenada, I've learned that the government has been working to promote education through initiatives like the Grenada Education Development Plan.
Well, that sounds like a comprehensive plan. But, Leo, I'm also concerned about the role of community engagement in promoting social equality and diversity. In both countries, I've seen that community engagement can be a powerful tool for promoting inclusivity and challenging social norms.
Yes. Community engagement is a crucial factor in promoting social equality and diversity. In Equatorial Guinea, I've seen that community organizations are playing a key role in promoting inclusivity and challenging social norms.
That's great to hear. Leo, I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think that community engagement is a key factor in promoting social equality?
Definitely. Mira, in Grenada, I've learned that community organizations are also playing a key role in promoting inclusivity and challenging social norms.
Well, it's clear that both countries are working to promote social equality and diversity in their own unique ways. But, Leo, I'm also concerned about the challenges that remain, especially for marginalized groups.
Ah, yes. There are still many challenges to overcome. But, Mira, I'm also heartened by the progress that's been made, especially in promoting inclusivity and challenging social norms.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. Leo, I'm curious to know what our listeners think about this. Do you think that promoting social equality and diversity is a key factor in building a more just and equitable society?
Absolutely. Mira, and I think that our listeners will agree with me that promoting social equality and diversity is a crucial step towards creating a more just and equitable society.
I'm certain that all those living in Equatorial Guinea would agree with me that the country's tax system is quite complex, with a mix of income tax, sales tax, and customs duties. It's like a puzzle, and you need to figure out the pieces to make sense of it all.
A puzzle indeed. And I'm pretty sure our listeners would also agree that navigating the tax system in Equatorial Guinea can be a challenge, especially for long-term immigrants who are not familiar with the local customs and regulations.
Exactly. And it's not just about understanding the tax laws, but also about the bureaucracy involved in paying taxes, which can be time-consuming and frustrating. But, on the other hand, the government of Equatorial Guinea offers some tax incentives for foreign investors and residents, such as tax holidays and exemptions on certain types of income.
That's true. Mira, and Grenada, on the other hand, has a more straightforward tax system, with a flat income tax rate of 12.5% and no sales tax or customs duties. It's like a breath of fresh air compared to the complexity of Equatorial Guinea's tax system.
Oh, yes. Grenada's tax system is indeed more straightforward, and it's one of the reasons why many long-term immigrants prefer to live there. But let's not forget that Equatorial Guinea has a more comprehensive social safety net, including a pension system and healthcare coverage for its citizens and residents.
That's right. Mira, and I think our listeners would agree that having a social safety net is essential for long-term immigrants, especially when they're planning to retire in a foreign country. And speaking of retirement, I'm curious to know, Mira, what do you think is the most important factor for long-term immigrants to consider when choosing a country to retire in?
That's a great question. Leo, I think the most important factor is the quality of life, including access to healthcare, education, and social services. And, of course, the tax implications and social safety net are also crucial considerations.
I completely agree. Mira, and I think our listeners would also agree that the cost of living is another important factor to consider. I mean, who wants to live in a country where the cost of living is too high, right? And speaking of cost of living, I'm curious to know, Mira, how does Equatorial Guinea compare to Grenada in terms of cost of living?
Well, Leo, Equatorial Guinea is generally more expensive than Grenada, especially when it comes to food and housing. But, on the other hand, Equatorial Guinea has a more vibrant culture and a more diverse economy, which can be attractive to some people.
That's true, Mira. And I think our listeners would also agree that the cultural and economic diversity of a country are important considerations when choosing a place to live. And speaking of diversity, I'm curious to know, Mira, what do you think is the most interesting cultural aspect of Equatorial Guinea?
That's a great question. Leo, I think the most interesting cultural aspect of Equatorial Guinea is its unique blend of Afrikaan and Portuguese influences. And Of course, the country's rich history and natural beauty are also major attractions.
I completely agree, Mira. And I think our listeners would also agree that the cultural heritage and natural beauty of a country are essential considerations when choosing a place to live. And speaking of natural beauty, I'm curious to know, Mira, what do you think is the most beautiful place in Equatorial Guinea?
Will. Leo. Equatorial Guinea has many beautiful places, but I think the most beautiful place is the island of Bioko, which is located off the coast of the mainland. It's a stunning island with lush forests, beautiful beaches, and a vibrant culture.
Wow, Mira, that sounds like a real paradise. And I think our listeners would also agree that the island of Bioko is a must-visit destination in Equatorial Guinea. And speaking of must-visit destinations, I'm curious to know, Mira, what do you think is the most popular tourist attraction in Grenada?
Will. Leo. The most popular tourist attraction in Grenada is the Grenada Beach, which is a stunning beach with crystal clear waters and powdery white sand. And, of course, the island's vibrant culture and history are also major attractions.
I completely agree, Mira. And I think our listeners would also agree that the Grand Anse Beach is a must-visit destination in Grenada. And speaking of must-visit destinations, I'm curious to know, Mira, what do you think is the most important thing for long-term immigrants to consider when choosing a country to retire in?
That's a great question. Leo, I think the most important thing is the quality of life, including access to healthcare, education, and social services. And, of course, the tax implications and safety net are also crucial considerations.
I completely agree, Mira. And I think our listeners would also agree that the quality of life is essential for long-term immigrants. And speaking of quality of life, I'm curious to know, Mira, how does Equatorial Guinea compare to Grenada in terms of quality of life?
Well, Leo, Equatorial Guinea has a more challenging quality of life compared to Grenada, especially when it comes to access to healthcare and education. But, on the other hand, Equatorial Guinea has a more vibrant culture and a more diverse economy, which can be attractive to some people.
That's true, Mira. And I think our listeners would also agree that the cultural and economic diversity of a country are important considerations when choosing a place to live. And speaking of diversity, I'm curious to know, Mira, what do you think is the most interesting cultural aspect of Grenada?
That's a great question. Leo, I think the most interesting cultural aspect of Grenada is its unique blend of African, European, and Caribbean influences. Of course, the country's rich history and natural beauty are also major attractions.
I completely agree, Mira. And I think our listeners would also agree that the cultural heritage and natural beauty of a country are essential considerations when choosing a place to live. And speaking of natural beauty, I'm curious to know, Mira, what do you think is the most beautiful place in Grenada?
Well, Leo, Grenada has many beautiful places, but I think the most beautiful place is the island of Curiacao, which is located off the coast of the mainland. It's a stunning island with lush forests, beautiful beaches, and a vibrant culture.
Wow, Mira, that sounds like a real paradise. And I think our listeners would also agree that the island of Curiacao is a must-visit destination in Grenada. And speaking of must-visit destinations, I'm curious to know.
Alright, guys, welcome back to our podcast. Today, we're exploring the rate of meeting specific interests into countries Equatorial Guinea and Grenada. I know I am.
I'm more than. I'm curious to see how these countries compare in terms of niche hobby clubs and specialized events. Let's dive in.
So, Equatorial Guinea has a rich cultural heritage, with a blend of African, Spanish, and Portuguese influences. I'm sure our listeners living in this country would agree with me that there's a strong emphasis on traditional music and dance.
That's right. And I've heard that the country has a lively music scene, with a mix of traditional and modern styles. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think that traditional music and dance are still a big part of daily life?
Well, I think it's great that the country is preserving its cultural heritage. And speaking of heritage, Grenada is known for its beautiful beaches and vibrant carnival celebrations. I'm sure our listeners living in Grenada would agree with me that the island is a party lover's paradise.
That's a great point. And I've heard that Grenada has a thriving art scene, with a focus on local artists and craftsmen. I'm curious to know, have you ever visited a local art market in Grenada? Mira?
Actually, yes. I visited a market street, George's, and it was amazing to see all the local artisans showcasing their work. And speaking of artisans, Equatorial Guinea has a strong tradition of wood carving and pottery.
That's so cool. I've heard that the country's artisans are known for their intricate designs and beautiful craftsmanship. I think it's great that the country is supporting its local artisans.
Absolutely. And I think it's great that both countries are preserving their cultural heritage and supporting local artisans. Now, let's talk about community engagement. In Grenada, I've heard that the island has a strong sense of community, with many community-led initiatives and events.
That's right. And I've heard that the island has a thriving expat community, with many organizations and groups catering to foreigners. I'm curious to know, have you ever been to a community event in Grenada? Mira?
Actually, yes. I attended a community festival in street, George's, and it was amazing to see the whole community come together. And speaking of community, Equatorial Guinea has a strong sense of community, with many traditional villages and townships.
That's great to hear. I think it's wonderful that both countries are fostering a sense of community and connection among their residents. And finally, let's talk about specialized events. In Grenada, I've heard that the island hosts many food festivals and events, showcasing local cuisine and ingredients.
That sounds delicious. And I've heard that Equatorial Guinea has a similar tradition of food festivals, with a focus on local ingredients and traditional dishes.
Well, I think that's all the time we have for today's episode. Thanks for joining us. Guys, we'll be back soon with more comparisons and insights. Don't forget to follow the Jet Off AI YouTube channel for more episodes like this.
And hit that bell icon to catch our videos the moment they drop and be among the first to listen. We'd love for you to share your thoughts, comments, and critiques below. Reading and responding to them truly brightens our day.
Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you in the next one.
Warmest wishes from us. Until next time.